Hello and welcome back to the Cosmic Enigma. Here we share real-life experiences of encounters with the unknown, stories that come from beyond the stars, crafted to help you relax and drift off to sleep. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. I love seeing just how far this mystery reaches. Now find a comfortable spot, take a deep breath, and let yourself be carried away. Story 1. I told them I only watched from a distance. As they took notes, the air hung heavy with the scent of rain-soaked soil, mingling with something metallic and sharp. The wooden bench beneath me held the imprint of my weight, a silent witness to the hour I'd spent there. A chill ran through the breeze, yet warmth lingered where my fingertips had brushed against the cold wrought iron. Light flickered unevenly through the leaves, casting dancing shadows that seemed to shift with every glance. The distant murmur of voices carried over, but it was the whispers hiding in the silence between them that I couldn't shake. My breath was steady, yet each inhale tasted of something unsettlingly sweet, like a forgotten memory surfacing too late. But the prints were still fresh in the soft earth. I've been carrying this story for so long now, letting it fester inside me like an infection that never quite heals. Every time I tried to speak about it, my throat would close up, my hands would shake. The words felt too heavy, too dangerous to release into the world, but I can't keep silent anymore. The distance between then and now feels both infinite and paper-thin, as if I could reach out and touch that moment again with just the wrong thought at the wrong time. I'm safe now, or at least that's what I tell myself every morning when I wake up in this small apartment, hundreds of miles from where it all happened. The walls here are painted white, clean and ordinary. The windows face east, letting in honest sunlight that doesn't play tricks on my eyes. I chose this place specifically because it's so mundane, so forgettable. Nothing strange ever happens here. Nothing ever will. But sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, I still hear that hum. Before everything changed, I was house-sitting for someone who'd gone away for the summer. It was supposed to be simple, peaceful even. The house sat on several acres of wooded land, far enough from town that the only sounds at night were crickets and the occasional owl. I'd been looking forward to the solitude, to having time to think and read without the constant noise of city life pressing in on all sides. The house itself was nothing special. 2 stories, built sometime in the 70s, with that particular shade of brown siding that was popular back then. Inside, it had the comfortable, lived-in feeling of a place where someone had been genuinely happy. Family photos lined the hallways, showing decades of birthdays and holidays and ordinary moments that seemed precious now in their simplicity. I settled into a routine quickly. Mornings I'd spend on the back porch with coffee, watching the mist rise from the trees. Afternoons I'd read in the living room where the light came in at just the right angle. Evenings I'd walk the property line, checking that everything was secure, that the woods hadn't encroached too far into the yard. It was during one of those evening walks that I first noticed something wasn't quite right. The trees at the far edge of the property formed a natural boundary, thick enough that you couldn't see more than a few feet into the woods. But that evening, as I approached the tree line, I caught a glimpse of something that made me pause. A flash of movement, too quick and too purposeful to be an animal. When I looked directly at the spot, there was nothing there. Just shadows and leaves and the ordinary geometry of branches against the darkening sky. I told myself it was probably just a deer, or maybe someone hiking through the woods. People had a right to walk wherever they wanted, as long as they weren't on private property. But something about the movement had felt wrong, too deliberate, as if whatever I'd seen had been watching me before I noticed it. That night, I made sure all the doors were locked. The next few days passed without incident, and I began to relax again. I fell back into my routine, telling myself that isolation was making me paranoid, that my imagination was running away with me. The house felt safe and familiar, and the woods seemed less threatening in the daylight. But then the electronics started acting up. It began with the radio in the kitchen. I'd been listening to music while making dinner when the station suddenly shifted to static. Not the normal kind of static you get when you lose signal, but something deeper, more textured, like voices talking just below the threshold of comprehension. I fiddled with the tuning knob but couldn't get the station back. Every frequency I tried gave me the same strange static, that sense of almost voices just out of reach. I unplugged the radio and finished cooking in silence. The next morning, the coffee maker wouldn't work properly. It would start its cycle normally, but then the brewing would slow to an irregular drip, as if something was interfering with its timing. The coffee that finally emerged was weak and bitter, with an aftertaste that reminded me of copper pennies. I began to notice other small malfunctions. The microwave's digital clock would occasionally skip minutes, jumping from 3:17 to 3:19 without explanation. The television would change channels on its own, usually to stations that showed nothing but snow. The landline phone would ring at odd hours, but when I answered, there would be nothing on the other end except a faint humming sound. I started keeping a mental catalog of these incidents, trying to find a pattern or explanation. Maybe the house had old wiring. Maybe there was some kind of electrical interference from a nearby radio tower or power line. But even as I constructed these rational explanations, a part of me knew they weren't sufficient. The malfunctions felt too coordinated, too purposeful. And then there were the sounds. They started so quietly that I wasn't sure I was actually hearing them. A low hum that seemed to come from inside the walls themselves, rising and falling in frequency like a mechanical heartbeat. At first, I only noticed it late at night when the house was completely quiet. I'd be lying in bed on the edge of sleep when the sound would creep into my awareness. I'd get up and walk through the house trying to locate the source, but the humming seemed to move with me, always just at the edge of perception. It was strongest near the electrical outlets, but unplugging everything didn't make it stop. Sometimes I thought it was coming from the basement, but when I went down to check, the sound would fade until I could barely hear it. During the day, I could almost convince myself I'd imagined it. But every night, as darkness settled over the house, the humming would return, and each night it seemed a little louder, a little more insistent. I began to have trouble sleeping. When I did manage to drift off, my dreams were filled with that sound, weaving itself through landscapes that felt both familiar and wrong. I'd dream I was walking through the house, but the rooms would be subtly different, the hallways longer than they should be, the windows looking out onto scenes that didn't match what I knew was outside. In these dreams, the humming would grow louder and more complex, developing harmonics and overtones that seemed to carry meaning just beyond my understanding. Sometimes I'd wake with the certainty that the sound had been trying to tell me something important, but I could never remember what. The lack of sleep began to affect me during the day. I'd catch myself staring at nothing, losing track of time, forgetting what I'd been doing. The house, which had once felt comfortable and welcoming, began to feel oppressive. The walls seemed closer than before, the ceilings lower. Even the family photos in the hallways looked different somehow, as if the people in them were watching me with expressions that weren't quite as friendly as they'd seemed before. I started spending more time outside during the day, but even that didn't provide complete relief. The feeling of being watched, which I'd first experienced at the edge of the woods, had grown stronger. It followed me wherever I went on the property, a constant pressure between my shoulder blades, as if invisible eyes were tracking my every movement. I'd turn around suddenly, hoping to catch whatever was watching me, but there was never anything there. Just trees and grass and the ordinary details of a summer landscape. But the feeling persisted, growing stronger each day, until I could barely concentrate on anything else. It was during the second week that I saw the lights. I'd been lying awake in bed, listening to the humming in the walls, when a flash of white light swept across the bedroom window. It was too bright and too brief to be a car's headlights, and besides, the house was too far from any road for that to make sense. I got up and looked out the window, but saw only darkness and the familiar silhouettes of trees. A few minutes later, it happened again. This time I was watching, and I could see that the light was coming from somewhere in the woods, moving between the trees in a pattern that seemed almost systematic, like a search. The light was pure white, with a quality that hurt to look at directly, as if it contained more illumination than should have been possible. I watched for nearly an hour, but the light never came close enough to reveal its source. It would appear in one section of the woods, sweep back and forth several times, then disappear only to reappear somewhere else entirely. There was no sound associated with it, no engine noise or footsteps, just that silent, searching illumination moving through the darkness. The next morning I walked to the edge of the property to look for signs of whoever had been in the woods. I found footprints in the soft earth near the tree line, but they weren't quite right. The impressions were too deep, as if made by someone much heavier than their size would suggest, and the spacing between them was irregular, sometimes too close together, sometimes impossibly far apart. But what disturbed me most was the way the prints seemed to circle the house. I followed them as far as I dared into the woods, and everywhere I looked I found more evidence of surveillance. Broken branches at eye level, as if someone had been pushing through the undergrowth. Patches of flattened grass where someone had stood for long periods. And always that sense of invisible eyes watching me as I investigated. That night the humming in the walls grew so loud I could hear it clearly even with my ears covered. It had developed a rhythm now, a pulsing quality that seemed to synchronize with my heartbeat. I got up and walked through the house, and for the first time I noticed that the sound was affecting other things. The water in a glass on the nightstand was vibrating in tiny, concentric circles. The metal fixtures in the bathroom were resonating with a faint, musical tone. I went to the kitchen to get away from the noise, but there I discovered something that made my blood run cold. The refrigerator was humming too, but not with its normal mechanical sound. It was producing the same frequency as the walls, as if the entire house had become a single, vast instrument playing a note I couldn't understand. And then I smelled it for the first time. That sweet, metallic scent that would become so familiar in the days that followed. It was strongest near the electrical outlets, but it seemed to drift through the house like incense, appearing and disappearing without any apparent source. The smell triggered something deep in my nervous system, a response that felt older than conscious thought. Every time I encountered it, my skin would break out in goosebumps, and I'd feel a pressure in my chest, as if the air itself had become heavier. It was a smell that seemed to bypass my rational mind entirely, speaking directly to some primitive part of my brain that recognized danger. I tried to trace the odor to its source, but like the humming, it seemed to move through the house according to its own logic. Sometimes it would be strongest in the basement, other times in the upstairs hallway. Once I followed it to the bathroom, where it was so concentrated that I had to leave immediately, gasping for fresh air. By the third week I was barely sleeping at all. The combination of the humming, the lights in the woods, and that persistent sweet smell had created an atmosphere of constant unease that I couldn't escape. I found myself jumping at ordinary sounds, seeing movement in my peripheral vision that wasn't there when I turned to look. The mirrors in the house began to bother me, not because of anything I could point to specifically, but because of the way they seemed to reflect things that didn't quite match what was actually in the room. The discrepancies were subtle, almost subliminal. A shadow that fell at the wrong angle, a reflection that moved a fraction of a second too late, light sources that appeared in the mirror but had no corresponding origin in the real world. I started avoiding the mirrors when I could, but they were everywhere in the house. The bathroom, the hallway, the bedroom, even a decorative one in the living room that I'd never paid attention to before. Each time I glimpsed my reflection, I had the unsettling feeling that it was looking back at me with an awareness separate from my own. It was around this time that I began to suspect I wasn't alone in the house. The realization came gradually, built up from dozens of small incidents that individually could have been explained away. Doors that I was certain I'd closed standing slightly ajar. Objects moved from where I'd left them, shifted just enough to be noticeable. The persistent feeling that someone had been in a room just before I entered it, as if the air itself still held the impression of another presence. I started leaving small tests for myself, a book placed at a specific angle on a table, a glass positioned precisely in relation to other objects, a hair laid across the threshold of a doorway. Time and again, I'd return to find these markers disturbed, moved in ways that couldn't be explained by settling or air currents. But it was the footprints inside the house that finally convinced me. I found them on a morning when the humidity was particularly high, when the hardwood floors showed every trace of moisture. There in the hallway outside my bedroom were the unmistakable impressions of bare feet. Not my feet, I was wearing socks, and besides, these prints were different. Larger, with an unusual spacing between the toes, and they seemed to shimmer with that same strange quality I'd noticed in the prints outside. The trail led from the front door through the living room, up the stairs, and directly to my bedroom door, where they stopped, as if someone had stood there for a long time, watching me sleep. I followed the prints back downstairs, my heart hammering against my ribs. They led to the kitchen, where they circled the table several times before disappearing near the back door. But the back door was still locked from the inside, the chain still in place exactly as I'd left it. That afternoon, I called the people who owned the house, thinking I should tell them what was happening. But when I tried to explain, the words came out sounding crazy even to my own ears. Strange sounds, mysterious lights, footprints that couldn't be there. How could I expect anyone to believe such things? Instead, I asked if they'd had any problems with intruders or if there was anything about the house I should know. They seemed genuinely puzzled by the question, assuring me that they'd never had any trouble, that the area was completely safe. Their certainty made me doubt my own perceptions, wonder if the isolation was affecting my mind in ways I hadn't considered. But that night I saw them. I'd been lying in bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the now constant humming in the walls, when I heard the front door open. Not the sound of a lock being picked or a window being broken, but the simple, ordinary sound of a door being opened by someone who had every right to do so. Footsteps moved through the house below me, slow and deliberate, following the same path the mysterious prints had taken that morning. I lay perfectly still, afraid to breathe as the sounds grew closer. The footsteps climbed the stairs with the same measured pace, each step perfectly spaced, perfectly timed. They stopped outside my bedroom door. I could hear breathing on the other side of the door, deep and regular, as if someone was standing there listening to me the same way I was listening to them. The breathing went on for what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. Then slowly, the footsteps moved away, back down the stairs, back through the house, back to the front door. But I never heard the door close. In the morning, I found more footprints, the same impossible impressions that seemed to press too deeply into surfaces that should have been too hard to hold them. This time, the trail led not just to my bedroom door, but around the entire perimeter of the room, as if someone had been mapping the space, learning its dimensions. I packed my things that day, telling myself I was being rational, that I'd completed my obligation and had every right to leave early. But even as I loaded my car, I could feel eyes watching me from the woods, could smell that sweet metallic scent drifting on the breeze. The drive back to the city should have been a relief, but instead I found myself constantly checking the rearview mirror, expecting to see lights following me through the darkness. Even after I'd put hundreds of miles between myself and that house, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me, that the distance was an illusion and I was still being watched. The dreams started a few days after I returned home. Not the vague, symbolic dreams I'd had while at the house, but vivid, detailed experiences that felt more like memories than imagination. In these dreams, I was back in that bedroom, but I wasn't alone. Figures moved in the darkness around my bed, tall and impossibly thin, their movements too fluid to be entirely human. They never spoke, but I could feel their attention focused on me with an intensity that was almost physical. They seemed to be studying me, cataloging every detail of my appearance and behavior, as if I was a specimen in some vast collection they were building. The dreams were so realistic that I'd wake up expecting to find myself back in that house, and it would take several minutes of examining my surroundings before I could convince myself I was really in my own apartment. But even then, the feeling of being observed would persist, following me through my daily routine like a shadow I couldn't shake. I started having physical reactions to electronic devices. Whenever I got too close to my computer, my phone, even the microwave, I'd feel that same pressure in my chest I'd experienced at the house. My skin would break out in goosebumps, and I'd catch myself holding my breath as if the air around these devices had become toxic. The sweet metallic smell returned too, appearing at random moments throughout the day. I'd be sitting in a coffee shop or walking down the street when that familiar scent would drift past, so faint I wasn't sure I was really smelling it. But each time it happened, I'd feel my heart rate spike, and I'd find myself looking around frantically for the source, for some sign of what was watching me. Months passed, then years, but the feeling never went away. I moved several times, thinking a change of environment might help, but the sensation of invisible eyes followed me wherever I went. I learned to live with it, the way you learn to live with chronic pain, but it never stopped affecting me. I began to notice patterns in the surveillance. It was strongest at night, particularly during the hours when I'd first heard the humming in the walls. It intensified around electronic devices, as if whatever was watching me was drawn to or connected to electrical fields. And it was always accompanied by that smell, that sweet metallic scent that had become as familiar as my own breathing. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision, tall shapes that would vanish the moment I turned to look. Sometimes I'd hear that humming sound in the walls of whatever building I was in, faint but unmistakable, rising and falling with the same rhythm I remembered from that house. I tried to convince myself it was all psychological, that the isolation and stress of those weeks had damaged my nervous system in some way, creating false perceptions and phantom sensations. But deep down I knew better. Whatever had been in those woods, whatever had entered that house night after night, had left something behind in me. A connection that distance couldn't break, a mark that time couldn't erase. The worst part is the certainty that it's not over. Even now, as I speak these words, I can feel that familiar pressure between my shoulder blades, that sense of invisible attention focused on me with predatory intensity. The sweet smell is growing stronger, and I can hear a faint humming coming from somewhere in the walls around me. I thought that by finally telling this story, by bringing it into the light, I might find some kind of peace. But I realize now that speaking about it has only made the connection stronger, has somehow called their attention back to me with renewed focus. They know I'm talking about them and they don't like it. Story 2. The air was thick with a quiet anticipation, and I stood unblinking, gazing at the worn carpet leading to the half-open window. The curtain rippled slightly, as if a breeze had disturbed it, but the night outside was still. Despite the silence, there was a distinct sensation of movement, an unseen shift that seemed to resonate within the walls. I couldn't tell what was drawing my attention, just a persistent whisper of unease. The shadows along the ceiling stretched and contracted, holding secrets I couldn't decipher. My heart skipped a beat as a gentle tap echoed from the corner, a sound that seemed to confirm a presence that left no trace, a breath that lingered just beyond perception. I wake up with that same taste in my mouth, metallic, sharp, like I've been biting copper wire in my sleep. The sheets are damp, but not from sweat, something else, something that evaporates before I can understand what it is. My fingers trace the fabric and find it warm in places where my body never touched. The dreams come in pieces now, fragments that don't belong to any night I remember living through. There's always that sound first, a humming that starts so low I feel it in my bones before I hear it. Then the light begins to seep through cracks that shouldn't exist in my bedroom walls. I've been checking those walls every morning, running my palms along the painted surface, searching for the fissures where that pale glow enters. But in daylight they're smooth, solid, the paint unmarked by any intrusion. There were lights behind the trees. The memory surfaces like oil on water, viscous and spreading. I remember standing in my backyard, but the grass felt different beneath my feet, too soft, too yielding, as if the earth itself had become something else entirely. The trees at the edge of my property line swayed without wind, and between their branches something pulsed with a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. I don't remember walking outside that night. I don't remember opening the back door or stepping onto the porch, but I can taste the air from that moment, ozone and something sweeter, something that made my tongue feel thick and strange. The humming is back now as I write this, so faint I might be imagining it, but my coffee cup vibrates against the table in tiny, measured trembles. The liquid inside forms perfect concentric circles that spread outward and disappear, only to begin again. I've started leaving recording devices around the house. My phone, an old tape recorder, anything that might catch the sound when it comes. But when I play them back, there's only silence, or worse, sometimes there are gaps, minutes missing from recordings that should be continuous, as if something reached into the files and carefully extracted pieces of time. The curtain moves again, same window, same gentle undulation despite the stillness outside. I approach it slowly, my bare feet silent on the worn carpet. The fabric feels different when I touch it, warmer than it should be, and underneath my fingertips I swear I can feel a pulse, slow and steady, like the curtain has developed its own heartbeat. I don't remember ever coming back. That thought arrives unbidden, carrying with it a sensation of displacement, of standing somewhere I shouldn't have been, looking back at something I shouldn't have seen. My legs ache with the memory of walking, but not on pavement or grass, on something that gave way beneath each step, something that seemed to breathe. The electrical outlets in my house have started humming, not all of them, just the one in the kitchen and the two in my bedroom. When I press my ear against the wall, the sound travels through the drywall like water through pipes. But when I called the electrician, his equipment showed nothing unusual. Perfect voltage, perfect connections. He looked at me with the kind of patience reserved for people who imagine problems that don't exist. But that night after he left, the humming grew louder, and the lights began to flicker in patterns that felt almost like communication. Long pulses followed by short ones, a rhythm that seemed familiar in a way that made my skin crawl. I've been losing time, small chunks at first, minutes here and there where I'd find myself in a different room with no memory of moving. Then hours, entire afternoons that vanish like morning fog, leaving behind only the lingering sense that I've been somewhere important, somewhere that changed me in ways I can't articulate. The taste is stronger now, copper and ozone and that sweet undertone that makes my saliva feel thick. I run my tongue across my teeth and find them coated with something that shouldn't be there. Something that tastes like the air before a storm, but sharper, more intentional. My reflection in the bathroom mirror seems delayed, not by much, just a fraction of a second where my movements and the mirror's response don't quite align. I raise my hand and watch my reflection follow a heartbeat behind. I turn my head and see my mirror self complete the motion just after I've stopped. The noise didn't come from outside. This realization hits me with perfect clarity. All those nights I've stood at windows, searching the darkness for the source of sounds that seem to emanate from everywhere and nowhere. But the humming, the gentle tapping, the whispered disturbances that wake me, they're coming from inside, from the walls themselves, from the air in my lungs, from spaces between spaces that I'm only now beginning to perceive. I press my palm against the bedroom wall and feel it pulse, slow and rhythmic like a massive heart beating just beyond the drywall. The paint is warm beneath my touch, and when I close my eyes, I can almost see through it, almost glimpse the vast spaces that exist parallel to my small room. There's a door in my house that I don't remember, not a new door. It looks like it's been there forever, painted the same color as the walls, with hardware that matches every other door in the house. But when I try to remember installing it, or even noticing it before last week, my mind slides away from the memory like water off glass. The door is always slightly ajar, never fully closed, never completely open, just that narrow gap that reveals nothing but darkness beyond. I've tried to close it completely, but my hand stops inches from the knob. Some instinct deeper than thought warns me away from that simple action. Sometimes I hear my own voice coming from behind that door. Not words, just sounds, breathing that doesn't match the rhythm of my lungs. Soft murmurs in tones that are mine but speaking in patterns I don't recognize. The light in my kitchen has started casting shadows that don't correspond to any objects in the room. Long, angular shapes that stretch across the floor and climb the walls despite the absence of anything that could create them. I've moved every piece of furniture, every appliance, but the shadows remain constant, as if they're being cast by things that exist in a different layer of reality. I've been drawing them, these impossible shadows. My hand moves across paper without conscious direction, sketching shapes that feel significant in ways I can't explain. When I step back and look at what I've created, the images seem to shift. Lines that were straight become curved. Angles that were sharp become soft. The drawings change when I'm not looking directly at them. The humming has become a constant companion now, so familiar that silence feels unnatural. On the rare occasions when it stops, the world seems too quiet, too empty, as if the sound has become necessary for reality to function properly. I find myself standing in rooms with no memory of entering them. The bathroom at 3 in the morning, staring at my reflection in the dark. The kitchen before dawn, my hand resting on the refrigerator door without any intention of opening it. The living room in the middle of conversations I don't remember starting, speaking to empty air that somehow feels occupied. There were lights behind the trees, and now I remember more. The way they moved with purpose rather than random flickering. The way they seemed to respond to my presence, growing brighter when I stepped closer, dimming when I tried to retreat. The grass beneath my feet had felt spongy, almost liquid, as if the earth was transforming into something more accommodating. I remember reaching toward those lights, my arm extending without my permission, drawn by a magnetism I couldn't resist. The air between my fingers and the glow felt thick, substantial, like reaching through warm honey. And just before contact, just before my skin touched whatever was creating that radiance, everything stops. The memory cuts off there, clean and absolute, like someone took scissors to the film of my experience and removed everything that came after that moment of almost touching. But my arm remembers. Even now, hours or days or weeks later, I can feel the phantom sensation of that near contact. A tingling that starts at my fingertips and travels up to my shoulder. Sometimes the feeling is so intense I have to look down to make sure my arm is still attached to my body. The door that shouldn't exist has opened wider. Not much, just enough to reveal a sliver of the space beyond. The darkness there isn't empty. It has texture, depth, movement, like looking into deep water at night where shapes move just beyond the reach of perception. I've been leaving things near that door, small objects at first. A pen, a coin, a piece of paper with my name written on it. By morning they're gone, not moved to another location. Simply absent as if they never existed at all. But sometimes, in that narrow gap between the door and frame, I catch glimpses of light that shouldn't be there. Brief flashes that illuminate nothing but somehow make the darkness more profound. My skin has started tingling at random moments, not the surface sensation of static electricity or cold air, something deeper, as if my nerve endings are responding to stimuli that my conscious mind can't detect. The tingling follows patterns, waves that start at different points on my body and spread outward in perfect circles. I've been mapping these sensations, drawing crude diagrams of where they start and how they spread. The patterns are consistent, always the same points of origin, always the same rate of expansion. Like my body is receiving signals from a source that operates on precise frequencies. The taste in my mouth has evolved, still metallic, still sharp, but now accompanied by flavors that don't correspond to anything I've ever eaten. Sweet but not sugar, bitter but not unpleasant, complex layers that shift and change as I try to identify them. Sometimes I catch myself savoring these phantom tastes, rolling them around my tongue like fine wine. I don't remember ever coming back, but I must have. I'm here after all, in my house, in my body, in what I assume is my normal life, but everything feels slightly displaced. Colors are more saturated. Sounds carry implications they never had before. The air itself seems denser, more aware. Objects in my house have started breathing. Not visibly, I have to touch them to feel it. The walls, the furniture, even small items like books and dishes. A slow, steady expansion and contraction that matches no rhythm I recognize. When I press my ear against these breathing surfaces, I hear nothing. But I feel the movement, gentle and constant, as if everything around me has become alive in ways that bypass normal senses. The humming has harmonics now, undertones and overtones that weave together into something almost musical, almost beautiful. I've started humming along without realizing it, my voice finding frequencies that complement the sound. When I catch myself doing this, I stop immediately. But the silence that follows feels like an interruption rather than a return to normal. Time moves differently now. Minutes stretch into hours. Hours collapse into seconds. I'll sit down to eat breakfast and find myself finishing dinner with no memory of the intervening day. Or I'll glance at a clock and watch the second hand move backward, counting off moments that unhappen as I observe them. The recording devices I placed around the house have started producing sounds I never made. Not voices, something more fundamental. Rhythmic pulses that match the breathing of my furniture, harmonic frequencies that align with the humming in my walls. When I listen to these recordings, my body responds, heart rate changes, breathing deepens, skin temperature fluctuates in patterns that feel choreographed. The shadows cast by the impossible light have started moving independently, not dramatically, just subtle shifts that catch my peripheral vision. A shadow arm that lifts when my arm is still. A shadow head that turns when I'm looking straight ahead. These discrepancies last only seconds, but they're becoming more frequent. I've been standing at the half-open window more often. The same window where this all started, though I'm no longer sure what this refers to. The curtain continues its gentle movement despite the still air outside. When I part the fabric and look out, the world beyond appears normal. Street lights, houses, the familiar geometry of suburban night. But something in that normalcy feels constructed, deliberate, like a stage set designed to reassure rather than reflect reality. The door that shouldn't exist has opened wide enough for me to see inside. The space beyond defies the architecture of my house. It's too large, extending farther than the dimensions of the room should allow. The darkness there isn't empty anymore. I can make out shapes, tall, angular forms that might be furniture or might be something else entirely. Sometimes I hear movement from that room, not footsteps, something more fluid, like large objects sliding across a surface that gives way beneath their weight. The sounds are accompanied by changes in air pressure that make my ears pop and my sinuses ache. My reflection has stopped following me entirely. When I stand before mirrors, I see myself as I was moments before, delayed actions playing out in glass while my actual body moves through different motions. Sometimes my reflection appears to be in different rooms entirely. Spaces I don't recognize but that feel intimately familiar. The taste in my mouth has become a constant presence, no longer just metallic and sweet, but complex enough to seem like actual sustenance. I've been eating less, sustained by flavors that exist only in my saliva. My body doesn't seem to miss the regular food. If anything, I feel more energized, more present, as if whatever is creating these phantom tastes provides better nourishment than anything I could put in my mouth voluntarily. There were lights behind the trees, and I remember now that they weren't stationary. They moved with intelligence, responding to my thoughts before I fully formed them. When I wondered what they were, they pulsed brighter. When I considered approaching, they arranged themselves into patterns that seemed like invitation. When fear crept into my awareness, they dimmed to non-threatening levels while maintaining their essential presence. I remember the moment of contact now, not clearly but in sensations that bypass visual memory. The feeling of touching something that was simultaneously solid and incorporeal, warm but not heated, substantial but not dense. My fingers passed through the light and found texture on the other side. Surfaces that felt like skin but weren't organic, like metal but weren't cold, like water but weren't wet. The contact lasted forever and no time at all. In that impossible duration, I understood things I can't articulate, saw places that don't exist in any geography I know, felt connected to vast networks of consciousness that span distances my mind can't accommodate. The experience was overwhelming and perfectly natural, terrifying and comforting, like coming home to a place I'd never been but had always belonged to. And then I was back in my house, standing at the half-open window, watching the curtain ripple in still air. But everything had changed, or maybe I had changed, or maybe the change was so fundamental that the distinction between self and environment no longer applied. The noise didn't come from outside, and now I understand why. It was never external. The humming, the gentle tapping, the whispered disturbances, they're coming from me, from spaces inside my body that I'm only now learning to perceive. My bones have become hollow chambers that resonate with frequencies from somewhere else. My blood carries harmonics that match the breathing of my furniture. My brain processes signals from sources that exist parallel to normal reality. I am the recording device, I am the receiver. The experience behind the trees didn't end when I returned to my house. It's ongoing, continuous. I've become a conduit for something larger than myself, and the symptoms I've been experiencing are just side effects of that transformation. The door that shouldn't exist is fully open now. The space beyond extends infinitely in directions that don't correspond to normal geometry. I can see others in there, figures that move with the same fluid grace I've been hearing. They turn toward me with faces that aren't quite faces, acknowledging my presence with gestures that bypass language and communicate directly with understanding. They've been waiting for me to realize what I've become, patient and persistent, allowing me to discover the truth at my own pace. The fragments of memory, the cyclical sensations, the repeated thoughts, all of it designed to guide me toward acceptance of a new state of being. I approach the door slowly, my bare feet silent on the worn carpet. The air grows thicker with each step, more substantial, until I'm moving through something that feels like warm liquid. The taste in my mouth intensifies, becoming so complex it's like experiencing an entire meal in each breath. The figures in the impossible room extend limbs that might be arms and gestures that might be welcome. Their forms shift and flow like water, but their intent is clear. They're inviting me to join them in spaces that exist between the cracks of normal reality. I step through the doorway and feel my body dissolve and reform simultaneously. The sensation is indescribable and perfectly familiar, like remembering how to breathe after holding your breath for a lifetime. The room beyond contains everything I've been sensing. The source of the humming, the origin of the lights, the explanation for all the changes I've been experiencing. But explanations are no longer necessary. Understanding has become direct, unmediated by language or logic. I know what I am now, what I've become, what I was always meant to be. The air is thick with quiet anticipation, and I stand unblinking, gazing at the worn carpet leading to the half-open window. The curtain ripples slightly, as if a breeze has disturbed it, but the night outside is still. Despite the silence, there is a distinct sensation of movement, an unseen shift that seems to resonate within the walls. The cycle begins again, but now I understand its purpose. Each repetition brings another closer to the threshold, another consciousness ready to expand beyond the limitations of singular existence. The experience never ends. It only finds new expressions, new recipients, new ways of sharing itself across the boundaries that separate one awareness from another. I taste copper and ozone and sweetness, and I smile. Somewhere someone else is waking up with this same taste in their mouth, wondering what it means. Soon they'll begin to notice the humming in their walls, the impossible shadows, the doors that shouldn't exist. And I'll be waiting for them in the spaces between spaces, ready to guide them home. Story 3. I found myself gazing at the curtain's edge where it quivered slightly, though no breeze slipped through the room. The walls seemed to hold their breath, and the ticking clock hesitated between seconds. Dust hung suspended in the air, capturing the stillness. I felt watched, but no eyes met mine. Time stretched thin as the room pressed inward, waiting with me for an assurance never given. My eyes traced the hem of the curtain again, just as it fell limp, motionless. But now a single thread, once tucked, lay strikingly loose on the floor. This is where it ends, where I end, really. Not in any dramatic way, but in this quiet understanding that some doors, once opened, reshape the very air you breathe. The thread lies there like a period at the end of a sentence I never meant to write. My fingers won't move to pick it up. They know better now. They've learned what I've learned, sitting here in this chair that feels both mine and not mine, watching fabric that moves without wind, in a room that holds secrets like water holds drowning things. The knowing sits heavy in my chest, not panic, not fear exactly, but recognition. The way you might recognize your own voice played back on a recording, distorted but undeniably yours. I understand now why the curtain moves, why the thread fell, why I can't leave this chair even though my legs work fine and the door remains unlocked. Understanding changes you. It rewrites the rules of what your body will and won't do. Before this moment, before the thread fell and the curtain stilled, I had been standing. My hand was pressed against the wall, fingers spread wide, feeling for vibrations that shouldn't exist. The wallpaper beneath my palm was warm, almost feverish, and it pulsed with a rhythm that matched nothing in this house. Not the refrigerator's hum, not the settling of old wood, not my own heartbeat, something else entirely. I remember pulling my hand away and seeing the imprint of my palm remain on the wall for just a moment too long. The floral pattern seemed to bend around where my fingers had been, as if the wall remembered touch in ways walls shouldn't. That's when I noticed the curtain beginning its dance, that slight tremor that would eventually bring me to this chair, to this understanding, to this thread on the floor. The warmth had started in my fingertips and traveled up my arm like slow electricity. Not unpleasant, but wrong in the way that dreams are wrong when you're trying to wake up but can't quite surface. I flexed my fingers, watching them move in the dim light, and wondered when the room had grown so dark. The lamp beside me cast the same yellow glow it always had, but somehow the shadows had deepened, pooled in corners like spilled ink. That's when I heard it again, the sound that had drawn me to press my hand against the wall in the first place. A soft scratching, like fingernails on fabric, coming from inside the walls themselves. Not mice, not settling pipes, something deliberate and patient, working at something just beyond my reach. The scratching would pause when I held my breath, resume when I exhaled, as if whatever made the sound was listening to me as intently as I was listening to it. Going further back, I can see myself in the kitchen, standing before the sink with a glass of water halfway to my lips. The water was wrong, not the taste, not the temperature, but the way it moved in the glass. Too thick, too slow, like it was thinking about being water rather than simply being it. I set the glass down carefully, watching ripples that took too long to settle, and that's when I first heard the scratching. It came from the wall behind the sink, soft and rhythmic. I turned off the faucet, thinking it might be related to the pipes, but the scratching continued. Grew more insistent, actually, as if my attention fed it. I leaned closer to the wall, ear pressed against the cool surface, and heard something that made my skin crawl. The scratching was spelling something out. Letters, words. A message I couldn't quite decipher, but somehow understood was meant for me. The kitchen felt different after that. The familiar space of morning coffee and evening meals became foreign territory. The refrigerator's hum sounded like whispered conversation. The microwave's digital display flickered between numbers and symbols I didn't recognize. Even the sunlight through the window seemed filtered through something that changed its quality, made it feel artificial, staged. I had been trying to eat breakfast when the strangeness began. Cereal in a white bowl, milk poured with the same care I'd used for thousands of other mornings. But the cereal wouldn't stay submerged. Each piece floated to the surface with unusual persistence, arranging itself into patterns that looked almost like letters, almost like words, almost like a message I was supposed to read. I stirred the bowl, scattered the pieces, but they reformed, insistent and patient. The milk itself seemed thicker than it should be, clinging to the spoon in ways that defied simple physics. When I lifted the spoon, the milk stretched between bowl and utensil like liquid silk, taking far too long to break. I found myself staring at this simple breakfast as if it held answers to questions I hadn't yet learned to ask. The normalcy of the moment felt performed, artificial, like a play being staged for an audience of one. That morning had started like any other. I woke in my bed in my room, surrounded by furniture I'd chosen and books I'd read and clothes I'd worn. Everything exactly as I'd left it, yet somehow subtly wrong. The angles of the room seemed sharper. The shadows fell in directions that didn't match the light from the window. My reflection in the dresser mirror moved just a fraction of a second behind my actual movements, like an actor missing their cue. I remember sitting on the edge of the bed, feet on the floor, trying to shake off the disorientation of sleep. But it wasn't sleep fog that clouded my thoughts. It was the growing certainty that something fundamental had shifted while I slept. The air tasted different. The silence sounded different. Even my own breathing felt foreign, as if I was inhabiting lungs that weren't quite the right size. The previous evening returns to me now with crystalline clarity. I had been reading in bed the same mystery novel I'd been working through for weeks, but the words on the page kept rearranging themselves when I wasn't looking directly at them. Peripheral vision caught sentences that weren't there when I turned my head. Characters' names shifted between paragraphs. The plot twisted in ways that made no sense, as if the book was rewriting itself to tell a different story entirely. I closed the book and set it on the nightstand, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the weight of attention on me. Not malevolent exactly, but intensely curious, like being studied by something that found me fascinating in ways I couldn't comprehend. The feeling was so strong I kept opening my eyes, expecting to see someone standing in the doorway or sitting in the chair by the window. But the room remained empty, filled only with that sense of being observed. The day before that evening, I had found the loose thread for the first time. Not on the floor where it lies now, but woven into the curtain's hem, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. I was dusting the windowsill when I noticed it, a single strand that seemed to catch the light differently than the others. When I touched it, just a gentle brush with my fingertip, it felt warm. Not just warm, but alive in the way that skin is alive, with a pulse and presence that made me jerk my hand away. But curiosity won over caution, as it always does. I touched the thread again, this time gripping it between thumb and forefinger, and felt it respond to my touch. It moved just slightly, like a cat adjusting to being petted. The sensation traveled up my arm, not unpleasant, but deeply unsettling. I let go immediately, but the feeling lingered, a tingling awareness that something in my house was not what it appeared to be. I should have left it alone, should have ignored that thread, that warmth, that subtle movement that could have been imagination but wasn't. Instead, I found myself returning to it throughout the day, drawn by a fascination I couldn't explain. Each time I touched it, the response grew stronger. The thread seemed to recognize me, to welcome my attention in ways that threads simply don't do. Going back further to the beginning of this strange unraveling, I remember the moment when everything changed. It was such a small thing, so insignificant that I almost didn't notice it. I was hanging new curtains in the front room, replacing the old ones that had faded beyond repair. Simple task, domestic and ordinary. I measured twice, cut once, hemmed the edges with careful stitches learned from someone whose face I can no longer clearly recall. But one stitch went wrong, just one in a hem that contained dozens. My needle slipped, pricked my finger, and a single drop of blood fell onto the fabric before I could stop it. I dabbed at it with a tissue, but blood and fabric have their own relationship, their own rules. The stain spread in a pattern that looked almost intentional, almost decorative, like a small flower blooming in fast forward. I should have thrown the curtains away then, should have recognized that some mistakes can't be cleaned, only lived with. But they were beautiful curtains, and the stain was small, and I convinced myself it added character rather than corruption. I hung them anyway, pleased with my work, unaware that I had just sewn something into my home that would slowly, patiently begin to change everything. The blood dried into the fabric, became part of it, and in becoming part of it, made the fabric part of something else. Something that could watch and wait and learn, something that could grow a single warm thread, could make words appear in cereal bowls and walls pulse with alien rhythms. Something that could teach dust to hang suspended and time to stretch thin and curtains to dance without wind. Now I sit in my chair, understanding at last what I invited in with that single drop of blood, that one careless stitch. The thread lies on the floor like a signature on a contract I never meant to sign. The curtain hangs still now, its work complete, and I remain here not trapped but transformed, part of something larger and stranger than the simple domestic life I thought I was living. The walls breathe around me and I breathe with them. The house has learned my rhythms and I have learned its patience. We understand each other now, the house and I, in ways that go deeper than ownership or habitation. I am no longer just living here. I am living as part of here, woven into the fabric of this place by a thread that began with blood and ended with acceptance. This is where it ends, this is where I end. Not in fear or struggle, but in the quiet recognition that some changes, once begun, can only be completed. The thread on the floor catches the light one final time, and I understand that it fell not as an ending, but as an offering. A small piece of what we've become together, the house and I, left lying there for the next person who might find it, might pick it up, might wonder at its warmth and the way it seems to pulse with gentle life. Story 4. The morning sun cast long shadows across the living room, creating a soft glow that played upon the hardwood floor. A clock ticked softly in the corner, its hands frozen at an impossible hour. The scent of fresh coffee hung in the air, mingling with the faintest whiff of smoke as if from a distant fire. Everything appeared serenely normal, except for the single chair turned away from the breakfast table, its presence alone unsettlingly deliberate. As the minutes passed, the stillness seemed to murmur secrets, urging me to look closer, yet leaving a palpable tension lingering in the hushed room. That was months ago, and I'm still living with what happened. I'm telling you this because I need someone to know, someone to understand that what I experienced was real, even though I can barely make sense of it myself. The sleeplessness started immediately after I returned, not the kind where you toss and turn, but something deeper. I would lie in bed perfectly still, eyes wide open, listening to sounds that shouldn't exist, a low-frequency hum that seemed to emanate from within the walls themselves. Sometimes I would get up and press my ear against different surfaces, trying to locate the source, but it always felt like it was coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. My electronics began behaving strangely. The television would flicker on in the middle of the night, displaying nothing but static that seemed to pulse with an almost rhythmic pattern. My phone would show missed calls from numbers that didn't exist, strings of digits that were too long or too short. The radio in the kitchen would tune itself to frequencies between stations, filling the air with that same persistent humming I heard in the walls. I tried explaining this to people, but their eyes would glaze over with that particular look of polite concern reserved for those who might be losing their grip on reality. They suggested stress, exhaustion, maybe I should see someone, but I know what I experienced, and I know it's still out there, still watching, still waiting. The dreams come every night now. Not dreams exactly, but fragments of memory that surface when my guard is down. I see myself standing in an open field, looking up at something that defies description. The memory is fragmented, like looking at a reflection in broken glass. I remember the way the air felt different, charged with an energy that made my skin crawl and my teeth ache. There was a figure in those dreams or memories, I can't tell which anymore, always at the edge of my vision, never quite in focus. Tall, impossibly thin, moving with a fluid grace that human bodies simply cannot achieve. When I try to look directly at it, the image dissolves, leaving only the impression of being observed, studied, catalogued. The worst part is the certainty that it's not over. Whatever happened to me out there, it was just the beginning of something larger, something that extends far beyond my understanding. I catch glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision, shadows that shouldn't exist, reflections that don't match their sources. The feeling of being watched has become so constant that I've stopped turning around when I sense eyes on me. But let me go back, try to piece together what led to this state of perpetual unease. The clearest memory I have is of standing beside my vehicle, keys in hand, staring up at the sky. There was something there, suspended impossibly against the backdrop of stars. Not a craft in any conventional sense, but a presence that seemed to bend light around itself, creating a distortion that hurt to look at directly. I remember the complete silence that surrounded this moment. No insects, no wind, no distant traffic. The world had been muted, as if someone had turned down the volume on reality itself. My breathing sounded unnaturally loud in my own ears, and I became acutely aware of my heartbeat, the rush of blood through my veins, the subtle creak of my joints as I stood frozen in place. The thing in the sky didn't move in any way that made sense. It would be in one position, then suddenly occupy a different space without any transition between the 2 points. Like watching a film with missing frames, creating a jerky, disjointed motion that made my eyes water and my head throb. I tried to move to get back into my vehicle and leave, but my body wouldn't respond to my commands. Not paralyzed exactly, but as if the connection between my mind and muscles had been severed. I could only stand there, watching, as this impossible thing performed its silent dance across the night sky. The temperature began to drop, but not in the gradual way of a cool evening. The cold came in waves, washing over me like water, and I could see my breath forming small clouds that dispersed too quickly, as if the air itself was somehow thin or wrong. The metal of my vehicle began to emit soft pinging sounds as it contracted, creating an irregular rhythm that seemed almost like communication. Going further back, I remember the signs that I should have recognized but dismissed at the time. The radio in my vehicle had been acting strangely for several hours before the main event. It would scan through stations on its own, stopping briefly on frequencies that carried nothing but that low, persistent humming. At first I thought it was a malfunction, maybe interference from a nearby transmission tower, but the pattern was too deliberate, too purposeful. The landscape itself seemed different as I drove toward my destination. Familiar landmarks appeared slightly off, as if someone had moved them a few degrees from their proper positions. Trees that I remembered as straight now lined at odd angles. The road signs seemed faded, their text blurring at the edges in a way that made them difficult to read even when I was close enough to touch them. My watch had stopped working, the hands frozen in place while the second hand continued its circuit, clicking audibly with each movement. The sound was hypnotic, almost soothing, and I found myself listening to it instead of the radio during long stretches of driving. Time seemed to move differently, stretching and compressing in ways that left me unsure how long I had been traveling. The electrical systems in my vehicle began to fluctuate. The headlights would dim and brighten without any input from me, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow across the road ahead. The dashboard lights pulsed in rhythm with something I couldn't identify, creating a soft glow that reflected off the windshield and created double images of everything in my field of vision. I remember pulling over at one point, thinking I should check under the hood, maybe disconnect the battery and reconnect it to reset the electrical system. But when I opened the door, the silence outside was so complete, so absolute, that I immediately pulled it closed again. The normal sounds of an evening in the countryside, the insects and small animals, the rustle of wind through vegetation, all of it was simply absent. The air outside smelled wrong, not unpleasant exactly, but metallic, like the scent that lingers after lightning strikes nearby. There was an ozone quality to it that made my sinuses burn and left a taste like copper pennies on my tongue. When I breathed through my nose, the sensation was sharp and clean, almost medicinal, but underneath lay something organic and unfamiliar. Even earlier, I recall the subtle wrongness that had been building throughout the day. Small things, easily dismissed individually, but forming a pattern when viewed together. The coffee I made that morning tasted flat, despite using the same beans and preparation method I always used. The water from the tap had a slight metallic aftertaste that lingered long after I finished drinking. My reflection in mirrors seemed delayed, as if the image took a fraction of a second longer than usual to match my movements. I would turn my head and my reflection would follow a beat behind, creating a disorienting effect that made me question my own perception. Photographs I took with my phone appeared normal on the screen, but when I looked at them later, there were subtle distortions, areas where the image seemed to bend or warp slightly. The vibrations started so gradually that I initially attributed them to heavy machinery operating somewhere in the distance. A subtle tremor in the floor, barely perceptible, that would come and go in irregular intervals. But as the day progressed, the vibrations became more pronounced, and I realized they weren't coming from outside. They seemed to originate from within the structure of the building itself, as if something was moving through the walls. Animals behaved strangely. Birds that normally gathered outside my windows were absent, leaving the feeders untouched and the usual morning chorus replaced by an unnatural quiet. A neighbor's dog, typically friendly and energetic, cowered behind its owner when I approached, whimpering softly and refusing to make eye contact. Even insects seemed to avoid the area, creating pockets of stillness in what should have been a thriving ecosystem. The nausea came first, so subtle I barely noticed it. A slight queasiness that I attributed to something I had eaten, or perhaps the beginning of a mild illness. But it persisted throughout the day, never getting worse but never completely going away either. With it came a strange sensitivity to light, as if my eyes were taking longer than usual to adjust to changes in brightness. There was a moment early in the morning before any of the more obvious signs began, when I felt completely normal. I was sitting at my kitchen table, enjoying the quiet of the early hour, watching dust motes dance in the shaft of sunlight that streamed through the window. The world was peaceful, predictable, operating according to the familiar rules I had always known. I remember thinking how perfect the morning was, how everything seemed to be exactly as it should be. The temperature was comfortable, the light was warm and golden, and there was a sense of contentment that comes from being completely present in a moment of simple beauty. I had no way of knowing that within hours, my understanding of reality would be fundamentally altered. The last normal thing I remember was the sound of a bird singing outside my window, a clear, melodic call that seemed to celebrate the beginning of another ordinary day. I listened to it while sipping my coffee, grateful for the simple pleasure of that moment, unaware that it would be the last time I would experience such uncomplicated peace. Now, as I finish telling you this, I can hear that same humming beginning again, soft but unmistakable, rising from somewhere deep within the walls around me. They know I've been talking about them, and they're not finished with me yet. Story 5. I keep reading this report, my handwriting, I think. The words feel familiar, like echoes bouncing around inside my skull, but I don't remember writing them. I don't remember being there inspecting anything. The clinical tone sounds wrong coming from me, but the observations feel right, too right. The door was ajar upon inspection, less than an inch. I can see it now, sometimes, the gap letting in a sliver of light that cut across the floor like a blade. But was I looking at it from inside or outside? The memory shifts every time I try to hold it steady. One moment I'm reaching for the handle, the next I'm backing away from it, heart hammering against my ribs. There was a hum, always a hum. It started low, so low I thought it was the refrigerator or the air conditioning, but it followed me from room to room. Even now, sitting here trying to piece this together, I can feel it vibrating through my bones. It's not a sound you hear, it's a sound that lives inside you. The cup on the table, I remember the cup, white ceramic, unremarkable except for the way the light caught the moisture ring it left behind. Perfect circle, too perfect. I touched the rim and my finger came away damp, but the liquid was gone, evaporated. How long had I been standing there? How long had it been sitting there? My reflection in the kitchen window showed someone I didn't recognize. Same face, same eyes, but something behind them had changed, hollowed out. The sink was bone dry, but I could smell soap, lemon scented. The kind that burns your nostrils when you breathe it in too deep. I must have washed something, cleaned something, but what? The bulbs, half the bulbs had failed. This keeps coming back to me, the sound of glass hitting the floor but delayed like thunder after lightning. Pop, tinkle, each one failing in sequence, casting the rooms into pockets of shadow that seemed to breathe. I can still feel the crunch under my shoes, but when I look down in the memory, my feet are bare. The soles are clean. I was methodical, that's what disturbs me most. The way I moved through each room, noting details, cataloging everything like I was documenting a crime scene. But whose crime? What had happened there? The furniture sat in perfect arrangement, chairs pushed in, magazines fanned just so, like a showroom, like no one had ever lived there at all. But someone had, I know because of the linens. Fresh linens, still creased from the package, but underneath them the mattress held the impression of a body. Two bodies. The pillow still smelled like hair and sleep and something else. Something metallic that made my stomach turn. The calendar bothered me then, still bothers me now. Last month. 1 month behind, like time had stopped and forgotten to start again. I flipped through the pages and every date was blank except one. A single X marked in red ink, no notation, no explanation, just that slash of color that seemed to pulse when I stared at it too long. I think I lived there, I think it was my place, but standing in those rooms felt like visiting a museum of someone else's life. The coffee mug in the cabinet matched the one on the table. The toothbrush in the bathroom was the same brand I always use. The books on the shelf were filled with my handwriting in the margins, but I felt like an intruder. There was a door I didn't mention in the report. I'm remembering it now. A door that should have led to the basement, but when I opened it, there were only stairs going down into darkness so complete it seemed solid. The hum was stronger there, much stronger. It pulled at something deep in my chest, like recognition, like coming home. I didn't go down. I know I didn't go down because I'm here now, writing this, trying to make sense of the fragments. But part of me did. Part of me is still standing at the top of those stairs, listening to that hum grow louder and louder until it drowns out everything else. The moisture in the cup, I keep coming back to that. Residual moisture noted, but noted by whom, for whom. The clinical language suggests an official report, but I don't work for anyone. Haven't worked for anyone in months, years maybe. Time feels elastic now, stretching and contracting without warning. I found photographs tucked behind the mirror in the bedroom. Pictures of the house, but different, older. The walls were a different color. The furniture was arranged differently, and in some of them there were people, faces I should recognize but don't. They're smiling, but their eyes look wrong, too wide, too knowing, like they're in on a joke I'll never understand. One photograph showed the kitchen sink, but it wasn't dry. It was full of dark water that reflected nothing. No light, no ceiling, no face looking down into it. Just black water that seemed to move even though the picture was still. The power surge. I wrote about scattered shards, bulbs failing, but I don't remember any surge. The lights just went out one by one, like something was moving through the house, extinguishing them deliberately, methodically. The way I moved through the rooms afterward, taking notes, documenting the aftermath of something I couldn't name. My hands shake when I write about this. They're shaking now, not from fear exactly, but from something deeper, recognition trying to surface. Like when you have a word on the tip of your tongue but can't quite reach it, except this isn't a word. It's an entire experience hovering just outside my consciousness. The calendar said last month, but which month? I can't remember what month it is now. Can't remember how long I've been sitting here, trying to reconstruct what happened. The pages around me are covered with attempts to remember, false starts, contradictions, different handwriting styles, like different people have been using my hand to write. Sometimes the memories come in flashes, bright and sharp as broken glass. Other times they seep in slowly, like water through cracks. The worst ones are the ones that feel completely real until I examine them closely. Then they fall apart, revealing themselves as constructions built from fragments of other memories, other experiences, other lives maybe. The house was empty, but it wasn't silent. Beyond the hum there were other sounds, footsteps in rooms I'd already checked, doors closing softly when I wasn't looking. The whisper of fabric against fabric, like someone adjusting their position in a chair I couldn't see. I keep trying to remember why I was there. Was I visiting someone? Was it my house? Was I running from something or towards something? The report suggests I was investigating, but investigating what? The clinical tone implies professional detachment, but my hands were trembling when I wrote it. The letters are shaky, uncertain. The moisture in the cup wasn't water. I'm certain of that now, though I can't say how I know. It was thicker, more viscous. When I touched it, it clung to my finger like syrup, but it had no taste, no smell, just that metallic quality that made my teeth ache. There was a mirror in the hallway that showed reflections that didn't match. I'd walk past and catch a glimpse of someone else's movement. Someone taller, thinner, moving with purpose while I stumbled through in confusion. When I stopped to look directly, the reflection corrected itself, but the wrongness lingered like an aftertaste. The basement door kept calling to me. Even now, writing about it, I can feel that pull, that certainty that answers wait in the darkness below. But what questions am I trying to answer? What happened in that house? What happened to me? I think I used to live there with someone. The impression in the mattress suggests two people, and there are two toothbrushes in the bathroom holder, though one looks like it hasn't been used in a long time. The bristles are stiff, yellowed, but the other one is damp, recently used. By me, presumably, though I don't remember brushing my teeth there. The photographs behind the mirror show the house changing over time. Walls repainted, furniture moved, but always that same wrongness in the eyes of the people in the pictures, as if they know something terrible is coming and they're powerless to stop it. In the last photograph, the people are gone, just empty rooms and that dark water in the sink. I found a journal in the bedroom drawer, my handwriting but older, different. The entries describe ordinary days, ordinary concerns, but between the lines there's something else, a growing awareness that something is wrong. The last entry is just one sentence, repeated over and over until the pen tore through the paper. The hum is getting louder. That's when I knew I'd been there before, not just once but many times, each time forgetting, each time discovering the same evidence, writing the same report. The clinical language is my attempt to create distance, to observe rather than experience. But you can't observe your own trauma. You can only live it over and over until it becomes a pattern worn into your consciousness. The calendar was wrong because time doesn't work the same way there. The house exists in its own pocket, its own rules. The moisture in the cup never fully evaporates because the moment never fully ends. The bulbs keep failing because the power surge keeps happening. The door stays ajar because I keep arriving to find it that way. But something is different this time. The memories are stronger, clearer. The fragments are beginning to connect. I can feel the pattern trying to complete itself, like puzzle pieces sliding into place. The hum is getting louder, even here, even now, far away from that house. I think I'm starting to remember what's in the basement, what I found there, what found me there. The knowledge sits heavy in my chest, pressing against my ribs like a bird trying to escape. But I don't want it to escape. I don't want to know. Some doors should stay closed. Some basements should stay dark. The report ends abruptly. No conclusion, no summary, just an inventory of observed details that add up to nothing and everything. But there's more, there's always more. The memories are surfacing faster now, overlapping, contradicting each other. I see myself in that house at different times, different ages, always alone, always afraid, always taking notes. Something is waking up, in me, in the house, in the space between memory and forgetting. The hum is getting louder. The door is opening wider. The moisture in the cup is starting to move. I should stop writing now. I should put down this pen and walk away and let the memories sink back into whatever dark place they came from. But I can't. The pattern demands completion. The story wants to be told, even if telling it means remembering what I've spent so long trying to forget. The basement is calling again, across distance, across time, across the thin membrane that separates what was from what is. And this time I think I'm going to answer. Story 6. Street lamp outside cast a soft amber glow into the living room, bathing everything in a sepia-toned calm. The faint aroma of fresh varnish hung in the air, mingling with the scent of rain through the open window. A gentle breeze ruffled the curtains, whispering secrets from the world outside. On the mantel a clock ticked quietly, a steady metronome to the night's quietude. As I moved to close the window, my foot nudged a small, unfamiliar object, a child's shoe, slightly damp, yet no children lived here. The room held its breath, and I felt the unsettling gaze of an unseen presence. That was 3 weeks ago. I've been staring at that shoe every night since, trying to understand why it feels so important. Why touching it makes my skin crawl with recognition I can't quite grasp. Something happened to me, something that carved holes in my memory like a surgeon's blade, precise and deliberate. I know this because of the gaps, perfect, clean gaps where thoughts should connect but don't. I've always had a good memory. I could tell you what I had for breakfast 2 months ago, what song was playing in the grocery store last Tuesday. But there's this void now, this space where something significant used to live. It's not like forgetting where you put your keys. It's like discovering a room in your house that you know you've been in before, but the door is locked and you can't remember what's inside. The shoe sits on my coffee table now, next to my laptop in a growing collection of evidence. Evidence of what I'm still trying to figure out. I've been recording voice memos, trying to catch my thoughts before they slip away again. Sometimes I play them back and don't remember making them. My own voice sounds strange, distant, like it's coming from underwater. I found the first real clue yesterday while cleaning out my phone. Buried in my voice recordings, between grocery lists and work reminders, was a file I didn't remember creating. The timestamp showed it was made the same night I found the shoe. When I pressed play, I heard my own breathing, shaky and uneven, like I'd been running. Then my voice, whisper quiet and trembling. They're still here. I can hear them moving upstairs. The lights keep changing colors and I can't look directly at them. Something's wrong with my reflection in the window. It's moving wrong, like it's on a delay. The air smells like new plastic and cold blood. I need to remember this. I need to remember before they make me forget again. The recording cuts off abruptly. I've listened to it dozens of times now, and each time it sounds less like my voice and more like someone else speaking through my mouth. The quality is strange too, like it was recorded through water or thick glass. There's something underneath my words, a low frequency hum that makes my teeth ache when I turn the volume up. I don't remember making that recording. I don't remember being afraid in my own house. But when I close my eyes and really concentrate, I can almost feel the echo of that fear, like a bruise that's faded but still tender to the touch. The shoe vibrates sometimes, just slightly, like a phone on silent mode. It happens at random moments, usually when I'm not paying attention to it. I'll be reading or watching television and I'll catch the movement in my peripheral vision. When I look directly at it, it's perfectly still, but I can feel the vibration in the air, a subtle wrongness that makes my skin prickle. I've started keeping a journal, writing down every strange detail I can remember or half remember. The entries are fragmented, like pieces of a puzzle that don't quite fit together. Some are just single words or phrases that feel important but make no sense. Backwards breathing, the sound of glass growing, fingers that bend too many ways. Reading through my notes, I found an entry I don't remember writing. The handwriting is mine, but the pen pressure is different, deeper, like whoever was writing was pressing too hard or their hand was shaking. The blackout lasted exactly 17 minutes. I know because I counted every second in the dark, but when the power came back, my clocks were wrong. All of them running backwards for those 17 minutes. The house felt different afterward, like the walls had shifted slightly while I wasn't looking. And there was someone else's breathing mixing with mine coming from right behind my left shoulder. When I turned around, nothing was there, but the breathing didn't stop. I have no memory of any blackout. I would remember sitting in the dark for 17 minutes, counting seconds. Wouldn't I? But when I check the clocks throughout my house, they all show slightly different times now, like they're struggling to synchronize after some interruption I can't recall. The fragments are getting clearer, but in a way that makes me wish they'd stay buried. I'll be doing something mundane, washing dishes or folding laundry, and suddenly I'm somewhere else, someone else. The visions hit like camera flashes, brief and blinding. I see myself standing in my kitchen, but the lights overhead are strobing in colors that don't have names. The refrigerator hums a melody that sounds almost like a lullaby, but played through broken speakers. My shadow on the wall moves independently, gesturing to something I can't see. In the vision, I'm not afraid. I'm curious, reaching towards something that's reaching back. Then I'm back in the present, hands shaking, wondering why my kitchen suddenly smells like ozone and copper pennies. The visions are becoming more frequent, more detailed. I see myself opening doors that lead to rooms that shouldn't exist in my house. I see figures standing in my backyard, perfectly still, facing my bedroom window. They're too tall and too thin, and their heads tilt at angles that make my neck hurt just watching them. In one flash of memory, I'm looking at my bathroom mirror, but my reflection is showing me a different room entirely. A room with walls that pulse like they're breathing, where the furniture is arranged in patterns that hurt to look at directly. My reflection self is trying to tell me something, mouthing words I can't hear through the glass. I've started checking my mirrors obsessively. Sometimes, just for a split second, I catch my reflection moving wrong. a delay like the voice recording mentioned. I'll raise my hand and my reflection will raise its hand a heartbeat later, as if it's copying me instead of simply being me. The shoe is warm now. It shouldn't be warm. It's been sitting on my coffee table for weeks, but when I touch it, it feels like it's been sitting in sunlight. The leather is soft, too soft, like it's been worn for years by feet that aren't quite the right shape. There are scuff marks on the sole that form patterns I recognize but can't identify. They remind me of something I've seen before, something that made me feel very small and very watched. I found another recording on my phone, this one buried deeper in the files, in a folder I don't remember creating. The folder is labeled with symbols instead of letters, symbols that my phone shouldn't be able to display. When I try to copy them or send them to myself, they turn into question marks. This recording is longer, nearly 10 minutes of mostly silence with occasional sounds that don't belong in any house I know. There's a rhythmic tapping, like fingernails on glass, but the rhythm is wrong, too complex for human fingers. There are voices too, but they're speaking in reverse, or possibly in a language that only sounds like English played backwards. About halfway through the recording, I hear my own voice again, but I'm not speaking to myself this time. I'm having a conversation with someone or something else. I understand, my voice says, clear and calm. You need me to forget so that I can remember properly later. The forgetting is part of the process. There's a response, but it's not in any voice I recognize. It sounds like wind through broken glass, like the whisper of pages turning in an empty library. Somehow, I understand it perfectly on the recording, nodding along like it makes complete sense. Yes, I'll keep the shoe. It will help me find my way back when it's necessary, when you need me to remember what really happened that night. The recording ends with a sound like a door closing. But the door is enormous, and it's closing very, very slowly. I've been avoiding sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see that room from the mirror, the one with the breathing walls, but I'm not just seeing it anymore. I'm there walking through it, and it feels more real than my actual house. The furniture in that room rearranges itself when I'm not looking directly at it, forming new patterns, new configurations that spell out messages I can almost read. There are others in that room with me. I can't see them clearly, but I can feel their presence, their attention focused on me with an intensity that should be frightening but isn't. They're familiar, like old friends I haven't seen in a long time. They speak without voices, and I understand them perfectly. They're showing me things, explaining things, preparing me for something that's coming, or something that's already here, waiting for me to remember it properly. The memories they're giving me are too big for my normal consciousness, too complex for my regular brain to hold all at once. That's why I had to forget first. That's why the gaps were necessary. The shoe is moving on its own now, not vibrating, actually moving, rotating slowly on the coffee table like it's trying to point towards something. I follow its direction, and it's always pointing toward my bedroom, toward the window that faces the backyard where those tall, thin figures sometimes stand. I went to the window tonight, following the shoe's silent guidance. The backyard was empty, but the grass was pressed down in perfect circles, as if something heavy and round had been resting there. The pattern was beautiful, mathematical, like a language written in negative space. As I watched, the circles began to glow with a soft, pulsing light that seemed to come from beneath the earth. The glow was the same color as the street lamp, that warm amber, but deeper, more alive. It pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat, or maybe my heartbeat was syncing to its rhythm. I pressed my palm against the window glass and felt it vibrate, the same subtle wrongness as the shoe. The vibration traveled up my arm and into my chest, where it settled like a second heartbeat, slightly out of phase with my original one. That's when I saw my reflection in the window glass, and this time the delay was gone. My reflection moved in perfect synchronization with me, but it was smiling while I was not. It raised its free hand and waved at something behind me, something I couldn't see when I turned around. When I looked back at the reflection, it mouthed a single word: soon. The fragments are assembling themselves now, whether I want them to or not. I remember standing in my backyard in the middle of the night, but I wasn't alone. The tall, thin figures were there, but they weren't strangers. They were welcoming me back, like I'd been away on a long trip and had finally come home. I remember the lights in the sky, not like aircraft or stars, but like holes in the darkness that let through illumination from somewhere else entirely. The light felt warm on my skin and made everything look more real, more true than it had ever looked before. I remember understanding things that I can't understand now, seeing connections between events and ideas that my normal mind can't hold. It was like being given a larger brain temporarily, one capable of processing realities that don't fit in the smaller version I usually carry around. And I remember agreeing to forget, not because I was forced to, but because forgetting was necessary for the next phase. The memories were too large to carry in daily life, too overwhelming to function with, so they were carefully removed and stored somewhere safe, somewhere I could retrieve them when the time came to remember again. The shoe was the key, the anchor point that would help me find my way back to the larger memories when they were needed. Every time it moved or vibrated or grew warm, it was reminding me that the forgetting was temporary, that the real memories were still there, waiting. I understand now why my reflection waves at things I can't see. It's not my reflection anymore, not exactly. It's the version of me that retained the memories, the one that stayed connected to the larger reality while this version lived in the smaller one. It's been trying to help me remember, trying to guide me back to the truth. The breathing I heard behind my shoulder wasn't threatening. It was companionship, someone staying close to make sure I was safe during the forgetting period. The backwards voices weren't speaking a foreign language. They were speaking the language I knew before I agreed to temporarily forget it. All the strange details, the impossible sensory experiences, they weren't hallucinations or signs of something wrong. They were glimpses of the larger reality bleeding through the carefully constructed forgetting, reminders that there was more to existence than the small slice I was temporarily experiencing. I can feel the memories returning now, not in fragments but in waves, each one larger and more complete than the last. I remember why I agreed to this process, what purpose the forgetting served. I remember what I'm supposed to do now that the remembering has begun. The shoe is glowing now, soft and warm like candlelight. When I pick it up, it fits perfectly in my palm, and I can feel the vibrations more clearly. They're not random, they're a pattern, a code, instructions for the next phase of whatever process I agreed to participate in. I can hear them upstairs now, moving around, preparing things. Not intruders or threats, but colleagues, partners in something larger than I could comprehend with my temporarily limited understanding. They've been waiting patiently for me to remember enough to rejoin them, to resume whatever work we were doing together. The patterns in my backyard are spreading, growing more complex, more beautiful. They're not just marks in the grass anymore, they're doorways, passages between the smaller reality I've been living in and the larger one I'm remembering. My reflection in the window is no longer delayed or separate. We're synchronized again, both versions of myself reunited as the artificial barriers between memory and forgetting dissolve. I can see what it was waving at now, the figures standing just outside the range of normal vision, waiting for me to acknowledge them properly. Everything is becoming clear, but the clarity is too large for words, too complex for the linear thinking I've been using during the forgetting period. I need to let go of the smaller way of understanding and embrace the larger one that's returning to me. The shoe is no longer just warm, it's singing, a frequency that resonates in my bones and reminds me of songs I used to know before I agreed to temporarily forget them. The melody is calling me somewhere, guiding me towards something that's been waiting for me to remember enough to find it. I can feel the walls of my house becoming permeable, the boundaries between inside and outside, between what I thought was real and what I'm remembering is more real, starting to dissolve. The breathing walls from my visions aren't in some other dimension, they're here, they've always been here, I just agreed to not see them for a while. But now the forgetting period is ending, and I'm starting to remember not just what happened that night, but what's been happening every night, what I've been participating in during the hours I thought I was sleeping. The larger work that requires both remembering and forgetting, both the smaller consciousness and the expanded one. The figures upstairs are moving closer now, and I can hear their footsteps, but the sound is wrong for the floorboards in my house. It's the sound of feet on surfaces that exist in the larger reality, the one I'm remembering how to perceive. I should be afraid, but fear belongs to the smaller consciousness, the one that was designed to be temporary. The larger awareness that's returning doesn't experience fear, only curiosity, only the joy of remembering something beautiful that was temporarily set aside. The shoe is pulling me now, not physically, but in some other way, drawing me toward the stairs, toward the figures who have been waiting so patiently for me to remember enough to rejoin them. Each step I take feels like walking through thick liquid, like moving between different states of reality. As I climb the stairs, I can feel the last barriers dissolving, the final walls between the smaller and larger consciousness crumbling away. I remember now what we were doing, what we're still doing, what I temporarily forgot so that I could experience the beautiful limitation of smaller awareness before expanding again. But even as the memories flood back, I can feel another forgetting beginning at the edges, a new cycle starting. Because this is what we do, what we've always done. We remember and forget and remember again, each cycle bringing us deeper into understanding, each forgetting allowing us to experience the joy of rediscovery. The shoe in my hand is warm and singing and pulling me forward, but I can already feel it starting to cool, starting to become just an object again as the next phase of forgetting begins. Soon I'll be downstairs again, staring at it on my coffee table, wondering why it feels important, beginning another cycle of investigation and gradual remembering. And somewhere in the space between remembering and forgetting, between the larger consciousness and the smaller one, something vast and patient continues its work, using minds like mine as instruments in a symphony too complex for any single awareness to comprehend fully. The figures at the top of the stairs are smiling, welcoming me back, but I can see in their eyes that this reunion is also temporary, that soon they'll help me forget again so that the cycle can continue, so that the work can proceed through another round of limitation and expansion. The shoe has stopped singing now, becoming ordinary again, but I know it will remember even when I don't, will remain as an anchor point for the next cycle of forgetting and remembering. And in the growing quiet of approaching amnesia, I have just enough time to wonder, How many cycles have there been already, and how many more are yet to come? Story 7. The alarm was deactivated at precisely 03:17 hours. The living quarters presented no overt signs of forced entry. Windows remained latched, furniture undisturbed. A single chair was positioned in the center of the room, facing the doorway. Surveillance systems recorded no footage between 02:58 and 03:22 hours. This gap, attributed to a temporary system error, lacks accompanying diagnostic data. The dust layer on the windowsill was unbroken, confirming no recent openings. An opened book lay on the table, its pages untouched by any smudges or finger marks. The air conditioning had been operating continuously, maintaining a steady temperature. One item was listed in the inventory, a journal missing from the desktop. The alarm system logs report no anomaly, yet the exit door was found unlatched. I still wake up to that sound, the humming. It starts low, barely perceptible, like the vibration of old fluorescent lights, but it grows, always grows. My neighbors think it's the building's ventilation system. The landlord insists there's nothing wrong with the electrical wiring, but I know better now. I know what that sound really means. The sleep deprivation is getting worse, 4 hours maximum per night, and that's on the good nights. Most of the time I just lie there, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the humming to start. When it does, I feel this weight in my chest, this certainty that something is watching me through the walls. My phone has started turning itself on again. The screen just illuminates in the darkness, casting that cold blue glow across my bedroom. No notifications, no calls, just light where there should be none. I've moved 3 times since then. Different buildings, different neighborhoods, but the phenomena follow me. The humming, the lights, that persistent feeling of being observed. I stopped telling people about it after the first few conversations. Their eyes would glaze over with that familiar mixture of concern and disbelief. They'd suggest seeing someone, getting help, taking medication. But you can't medicate away something that exists outside your own mind. The electronics are the worst part, not just my phone anymore. The television turns on by itself, always to static. The radio picks up frequencies that shouldn't exist, voices speaking in languages I don't recognize, or sometimes just breathing. Long, steady breaths that seem to sync with my own heartbeat. I've replaced every device twice now. It doesn't matter. Sometimes I catch myself standing at the window for hours, scanning the sky, looking for that light, that impossible, silent light that hangs in the air like a star that's fallen too close to Earth. My hands shake when I think about it too long, when I remember how it moved, how it seemed to respond to my thoughts before I even knew I was thinking them. The memory comes back in fragments now, pieces of that night reassembling themselves in my consciousness like a puzzle I never wanted to solve. I remember the silence first, not just quiet, but the complete absence of sound, as if the world had been wrapped in cotton. No insects, no wind, even my own breathing seemed muffled, distant. There was a figure standing at the edge of the clearing, motionless, impossibly tall and thin, or maybe my perspective was distorted. The darkness made it difficult to determine where the figure ended and the shadows began. It didn't move, didn't gesture, didn't make any attempt at communication. It simply stood there, and I knew with absolute certainty that it was looking at me, through me, into me. The light hung above it, maybe 50 feet off the ground, perfectly circular, perfectly still. Not bright enough to hurt your eyes, but bright enough to cast everything in this strange, silvery illumination that made familiar objects look foreign. The light had no source, no visible structure supporting it. It was just there, defying every law of physics I thought I understood. I don't remember moving toward it. I don't remember making the conscious decision to leave my position. But suddenly I was closer, close enough to see that the figure wasn't quite human. The proportions were wrong. The way it held itself was wrong. Everything about it was wrong, but in a way that my mind couldn't quite process or categorize. That's when the time started slipping. Minutes would pass in what felt like seconds, or maybe hours compressed into heartbeats. My watch stopped working. The digital display just showed random numbers, cycling through sequences that made no mathematical sense. When I looked up at the sky, the stars seemed to be moving, rotating slowly around that impossible light. Going back further, I remember the signs I should have recognized. The electrical disturbances had been happening for weeks before that night. Streetlights would flicker when I walked beneath them. My car radio would scan through stations on its own, settling on empty frequencies that somehow still carried sound. Faint melodies that seemed familiar but belonged to no song I'd ever heard. The air itself felt different during those weeks, charged, like the moments before a thunderstorm when the atmospheric pressure drops and every hair on your body stands on end. But there were no storms, just clear skies and that persistent feeling that something was building, gathering strength, preparing for something I couldn't name. I started losing time during the day too. I'd be sitting at my desk working and suddenly realize that hours had passed without any memory of what I'd been doing. My coworkers would mention conversations we'd had that I couldn't recall. Documents would appear on my computer that I didn't remember creating, filled with notes in my own handwriting about subjects I'd never studied. The metallic taste started around then, not constant but recurring, like I'd been chewing on copper pennies or holding batteries against my tongue. It would come in waves, usually in the evening, accompanied by that low-frequency vibration that seemed to emanate from the ground itself. My apartment would shake slightly, just enough to make the water in my glass ripple, but my neighbors never felt anything. The smell came first, though, weeks before everything else. Ozone, sharp and clean like the air after lightning strikes, but there were no storms, no electrical activity that could account for it. It would drift through my apartment at random intervals, strongest near the windows, as if something outside was generating it, something that watched and waited and planned. I remember the last normal evening clearly now. I'd made dinner, something simple, and settled in to read. The book was about astronomy, filled with photographs of distant galaxies and theoretical discussions about life beyond our planet. Ironic, considering what was about to happen. The air conditioning hummed its familiar rhythm. The sun set gradually, painting the walls in warm orange light that faded to purple, then to black. Everything was peaceful, ordinary, the kind of evening that should have ended with sleep and dreams and morning coffee. I had no idea that something was already watching me from the darkness beyond my windows. No idea that the chair I'd positioned to catch the last rays of sunlight would soon be moved to face the door by hands that weren't mine. No idea that my journal, filled with mundane observations about weather and work and daily routines, would disappear into a gap in time that officially doesn't exist. The humming starts again now as I finish telling you this. Do you hear it too, or is it just for me? That low, persistent vibration that means they're still out there, still watching, still waiting for the right moment to return. The light outside my window isn't moving yet, but I know it will. And when it does, I'll lose another piece of time, another fragment of myself, to something that exists in the spaces between our understanding of what's possible. The chair is facing the door again, story 8. Every morning, without fail, the newspaper landed on my doorstep, always folded so the third page peeked out. It was a small comfort, a familiar ritual in a world that seemed to spin faster with each passing day. But last Tuesday I noticed an edge was crumpled, a detail I could easily dismiss. Then yesterday an ad was circled on the second page instead, and today the third page was torn diagonally, an erratic line breaking its usual neatness. Perhaps it's just careless delivery. But now the torn edge seems to point to something I can't quite see. I keep touching the paper. The texture feels wrong between my fingers, too smooth in some places, rough in others where it shouldn't be. My kitchen table vibrates slightly when I set the newspaper down, a frequency I can feel in my chest, like standing too close to speakers at a concert, but there's no music playing. The refrigerator hums its usual tune, but underneath that familiar sound, something else pulses, something that makes my teeth ache. The coffee tastes metallic this morning. There were lights behind the trees. Sleep doesn't come easily anymore. When I close my eyes, I see that door again. Always half open, never fully closed, never wide enough to see what lies beyond. The door frame is painted white, chipped at the bottom corner where something scraped against it. But I don't remember having a white door. My doors are all brown wood, stained dark. Yet there it is, floating in the space between waking and dreaming, that persistent half-open entrance to nowhere. The buzzing starts around 3 in the morning, not the newspaper delivery truck that comes much later. This sound moves through the walls themselves, a deep electrical hum that makes the picture frames rattle against their nails. I've walked through every room, checking outlets, unplugging devices, but the sound continues. It's not coming from inside the house. My skin tingles when I stand in the hallway. The sensation starts at my fingertips and travels up my arms like static electricity, but warmer, more alive. The air itself seems to shimmer when I'm not looking directly at it, catching movement in my peripheral vision that disappears when I turn my head. I don't remember ever coming back. The newspaper boy has brown hair, I think. Yesterday I could have sworn it was blonde, catching the early sunlight as he pedaled his bicycle down the street. But when I saw him this afternoon, walking instead of riding, his hair was definitely brown. Dark brown, almost black at the roots. He looked older too, his face longer, more angular. When he noticed me watching from the window, he smiled. Too many teeth. The torn edge points toward the basement door. Time moves strangely now. I'll sit down to read the morning paper and suddenly the shadows have shifted, pointing in directions that suggest hours have passed. My coffee grows cold in the cup, a skin forming on the surface that I don't remember being there moments before. The clock on the wall ticks its steady rhythm, but sometimes I catch it moving backward just for a second, just long enough to make me doubt what I've seen. That metallic smell again, sharp like copper pennies left in the rain, mixed with something else. Something that reminds me of summer storms, the ozone scent that comes before lightning strikes. But the sky outside remains clear, cloudless blue stretching endlessly in all directions. The door is opening wider. I found myself standing in the backyard last night, barefoot on the cold grass, looking up at stars that seemed too bright, too close. My pajamas were damp with dew, which meant I'd been outside for a while, but I only remembered stepping onto the back porch for a moment, just to listen to the night sounds, the crickets and distant traffic. But the crickets had gone silent, and the traffic seemed to come from above rather than the street. The newspaper feels heavier each morning, not the weight of more pages, but a density that seems to pull at my hands, making my arms tired just from holding it. The ink smears when I touch it, leaving dark fingerprints on everything I handle afterward. I've washed my hands repeatedly, but the stains remain, faint gray marks that follow the lines of my palms like a map of somewhere I've never been. The noise didn't come from outside. That door again, but now I can see a sliver of what lies beyond. Light, but not the warm yellow of lamplight or the cool white of fluorescent bulbs. This light moves, pulses with the same rhythm as that electrical hum in the walls. It casts no shadows, creates no reflections, simply exists in that space beyond the threshold like liquid brightness. My reflection in the bathroom mirror looks tired, more tired than I feel, with dark circles under eyes that seem larger than they should be. Sometimes when I'm brushing my teeth or washing my face, I catch my reflection moving slightly out of sync with my actual movements. A delay of half a second, as if the image in the glass is remembering what I did rather than showing what I'm doing. The basement door stands open now, though I know I closed it yesterday. The hinges don't creak the way they used to. They move silently, smoothly, as if someone has oiled them recently. The wooden steps disappear into darkness that seems thicker than normal shadow, more substantial. When I flip the light switch, nothing happens. The bulb isn't burned out. I can see the filament glowing faintly inside the glass, but no light emerges. There were lights behind the trees. The newspaper boy doesn't use a bicycle anymore. He walks, but his steps don't match the sound of footsteps on pavement. The rhythm is wrong, too quick or too slow, I can never quite tell which. His bag seems empty now, no longer bulging with rolled papers, yet somehow my newspaper still appears each morning, still folded with that third page showing, still bearing that diagonal tear that points toward my basement door. I taste copper when I wake up, not blood, but something cleaner, more electric. Like licking a battery, that sharp zing on the tongue that makes saliva flood my mouth. The taste lingers through breakfast, through my morning coffee, through the careful examination of another newspaper that feels stranger in my hands each day. The air in my house moves differently now. Currents I never noticed before flow through rooms, stirring papers on tables, making curtains sway when all the windows are closed. The movement has direction, purpose, like invisible rivers carrying something from room to room. I can feel these currents against my skin, cool streams of air that raise goosebumps and make the hair on my arms stand up. I don't remember ever coming back. That half-open door has become a constant presence in my peripheral vision. Not just when I close my eyes, but during waking hours, hovering at the edge of my sight like an afterimage. When I turn to look directly at it, there's nothing there, just the familiar walls of my home. But the moment I look away, it returns, that white painted frame with its chipped corner, that slice of pulsing light beyond. The buzzing has grown stronger, more insistent. It vibrates through the floorboards now, up through my feet and into my bones. Sometimes I think I can almost understand it, as if it carries meaning just beyond my comprehension. Like hearing a conversation in another room, voices muffled by walls and distance, words that sound important but remain unclear. My hands shake when I hold the newspaper now. Not from fear or cold, but from that same electrical frequency that runs through everything else. The trembling matches the pulse of the light behind the door, the rhythm of the buzzing in the walls, the beat of something vast and patient that surrounds me without revealing itself. The basement calls to me with its open door and useless light switch. The darkness down there breathes, expands and contracts like living lung tissue. I can hear something moving in that space, not footsteps or the scurrying of small creatures, but a sound like fabric brushing against fabric, soft and continuous and somehow urgent. The noise didn't come from outside. Sleep brings no rest anymore. When I lie down and close my eyes, time becomes fluid, unreliable. Minutes stretch into hours, hours compress into seconds. I dream of standing in places I've never been, under skies that hold too many stars, breathing air that tastes of metal and electricity and something else, something sweet and cloying that makes my stomach turn. The newspaper boy's smile grows wider each time I see him. His teeth are too white, too uniform, like porcelain tiles arranged in perfect rows. When he waves at me through the window, his hand moves too slowly, as if he's underwater or moving through thick honey. But his eyes follow me with sharp intelligence, tracking my movements with predatory focus. That torn edge in the newspaper has grown longer, the diagonal cut extending further across the page each morning. Today it reaches almost to the fold, creating a flap that lifts in the artificial breeze that flows through my house. Underneath, the paper shows not more text or advertisements, but a darkness that seems to extend beyond the physical page, a window into the same space I see behind that persistent door. I found myself in the basement yesterday. No memory of walking down those stairs, no recollection of opening that door wider, but there I stood on the concrete floor, surrounded by that breathing darkness. My bare feet were cold against the stone, and when I looked up toward the ceiling, the light from upstairs seemed impossibly distant, a small square of normalcy floating in an ocean of shadow. The electrical hum is louder down there, coming from everywhere and nowhere, resonating in my chest cavity like a second heartbeat. The walls feel soft when I touch them, yielding slightly under pressure as if they're made of something organic rather than concrete and wood. The air moves differently too, thicker, more substantial, carrying scents of ozone and copper, and that underlying sweetness that makes my mouth water and my stomach clench simultaneously. There were lights behind the trees. Time stops completely in the basement. I know this because I can see dust motes suspended in the air, frozen mid-fall like tiny planets hanging in space. My own breathing becomes visible, silver threads of moisture that don't dissipate but accumulate, forming patterns in the air that look almost like writing, almost like instructions, almost like a map of somewhere I'm supposed to go but can't quite remember. The newspaper waits for me each morning, but now I understand it's not really a newspaper. The text shifts when I'm not looking directly at it, words rearranging themselves into new configurations, new meanings. The torn edge has become a perfect diagonal line, surgically precise, pointing not just toward my basement door but through it, beyond it, toward something that waits in the breathing darkness below. My reflection has stopped moving out of sync. Now it moves ahead of me, anticipating my gestures, leading rather than following. When I raise my hand to touch the mirror, my reflection's hand is already pressed against the glass from the other side, palm to palm with perfect alignment. Its eyes hold knowledge that mine don't yet possess, secrets that wait just behind the surface of understanding. The basement door stands fully open now, has been open for days or weeks or months. Time has become too fluid to measure accurately. The darkness beyond has texture, depth, personality. It welcomes me with warm currents of air that smell like home, like safety, like the place I've been trying to remember how to find. I don't remember ever coming back. But I will go back. I am going back. I'm already there, standing in that space between spaces, breathing air that tastes of electricity and promise. The newspaper boy waves from his position among the trees, his too-wide smile reflecting light that comes from everywhere and nowhere. His bag is full again, heavy with messages for people who are learning to see, learning to remember, learning to understand that the world is larger and stranger than they ever imagined. The buzzing has become music, harmonies that resonate in frequencies below human hearing but above human comprehension. My skin tingles with recognition, with homecoming, with the joy of finally understanding what the torn edge was always pointing toward. The door closes behind me, but it's not really closing. Its opening has always been opening, will always be open for those who learn to see the signs in folded newspapers and electrical hums and lights that pulse behind familiar trees. Every morning without fail, the newspaper lands on my doorstep, always folded so the third page peeks out. The noise didn't come from outside, story 9. I had been watching the narrow strip of light beneath the door for what felt like an eternity. The air was dense with expectation, each creak of the old wooden floor amplifying the silence. Shadows seemed to stretch and shrink along the walls, yet held no form, no substance that I could grasp. The light from the window shifted subtly, casting unfamiliar patterns that offered no clues. My own breath felt intrusive, too loud in the stillness. Then, as if it had always been waiting, a gentle scrape, a sound too deliberate to ignore, broke the spell. The light under the door dimmed, a sliver disappearing, leaving me to wonder what had changed beyond the threshold. But nothing really happened that night. I need to make that clear from the start. Whatever I thought I saw, whatever I think I remember, it was just my mind playing tricks on me. I'd been tired, working too many long shifts, and sometimes when you're that exhausted, your brain starts filling in gaps that aren't really there. That's all it was. I didn't see anything unusual. The door was just a door, painted white with those little chips near the handle where someone had scraped it with keys over the years. Perfectly ordinary. The light underneath was from the hallway fixture, nothing more. Maybe the bulb was getting old, flickering a bit. That would explain why it seemed to dim and bright. Old buildings have electrical issues all the time. The scraping sound was probably just the house settling. These older places make all kinds of noises, especially when the temperature drops at night. Wood contracts, pipes shift, foundations adjust. I've lived in enough apartments to know how these things work. There's always a logical explanation. I wasn't even really watching the door. I mean, I was looking in that direction, but I was probably half asleep already. You know how it is when you're lying in bed and your eyes just happen to be pointed somewhere. It doesn't mean you're actually focusing on anything specific. The mind wanders, creates patterns where none exist. But I do remember the way the light seemed to move. Not flicker exactly, more like something was passing back and forth on the other side, slowly, deliberately, like someone pacing in the hallway, their shadow interrupting the beam. But that's impossible because I would have heard footsteps. The floors in that building creaked with every step. You couldn't walk anywhere without announcing yourself. I didn't hear any footsteps though, just that scraping sound, which was definitely just the house settling. Or maybe a tree branch against the window somewhere else in the building. Wind can make all sorts of strange noises when it hits a structure at the right angle. The thing is, I wasn't even fully awake. I must have been in that twilight state between sleeping and waking where everything seems more significant than it really is. Dreams bleed into reality, and suddenly ordinary things take on this weight they don't actually have. That's why I thought the shadow under the door looked almost deliberate, like it was aware of me watching. But shadows can't be aware of anything. They're just absence of light, nothing more. And I certainly didn't see any shadow that looked like it was crouched down, pressed against the gap under the door. That would be ridiculous. Who would do something like that? And why would they stay so perfectly still for so long? I must have dozed off at some point because the next thing I knew, it was getting lighter outside. Not morning light exactly, but that gray pre-dawn glow that makes everything look washed out and uncertain. The strip of light under the door had changed too, gone from that warm yellow to something cooler, bluer. Different bulb maybe, or just the way my eyes were adjusting. I didn't get up to check. There was no reason to check because nothing had happened. I just lay there, listening to the normal sounds of a building waking up. Pipes gurgling, distant doors closing, the hum of electricity in the walls. All perfectly ordinary sounds that had perfectly ordinary explanations. Though I don't remember hearing any of those sounds while I was watching the door. The silence had been so complete it almost felt solid, like something you could touch. But silence isn't unusual at night. People sleep, traffic dies down, the world gets quiet. That's normal. What wasn't normal was how the quiet seemed to have texture, like it was waiting for something, holding its breath. But that's just poetic thinking, the kind of meaningless observation your brain makes when it's not fully engaged. Silence doesn't wait for anything, it's just the absence of sound. I definitely didn't hear breathing on the other side of the door. That would have been impossible anyway, given how thick the door was and how well insulated the apartment was. If someone had been standing out there, which they weren't, I wouldn't have been able to hear something as subtle as breathing. The human ear isn't that sensitive through solid wood. But I do remember thinking the rhythm was wrong, too slow, too measured, like someone trying very hard to breathe quietly, concentrating on each inhale and exhale. The way you might breathe if you were trying not to be detected, if you were listening as intently as you were being listened to. Of course, that's just my imagination filling in details that weren't there. The mind is remarkably good at creating patterns, even in random noise. What I probably heard was the heating system cycling on and off, or air moving through the vents. HVAC systems can create all kinds of rhythmic sounds that might seem organic if you're not thinking clearly. I wasn't thinking clearly that night. I'd had too much coffee earlier, and caffeine can make you hypersensitive to things that wouldn't normally register. Every little sound gets amplified, every shadow seems more significant. It's a well-documented effect, nothing mysterious about it. So when I thought I saw the light under the door shift in a way that suggested something large had moved very close to it, that was just the caffeine making me hypervigilant. And when it seemed like whatever was out there had pressed itself against the door, close enough that the light was almost completely blocked, that was just my overstimulated nervous system misinterpreting perfectly normal variations in the hallway lighting. I certainly didn't see what looked like fingers sliding under the gap. That would be physically impossible anyway. The space between the door and the floor was maybe half an inch at most. Nobody's fingers are that flat, and even if they were, why would someone do something so strange? It doesn't make any sense. But I can still picture them clearly, long and pale, moving with careful precision along the edge of the carpet, testing the boundary between the hallway and my room, the way they curved slightly as if feeling for something specific, the way they withdrew so slowly when I shifted on the bed, disappearing back into the hallway like they had never been there at all. None of that actually happened though. I was probably dreaming by that point, caught in one of those vivid nightmares that feel completely real while you're experiencing them. The kind where you're convinced you're awake, but everything is just slightly wrong in ways you can't quite identify. Dreams can be incredibly detailed. They can include sensory information that seems completely authentic, even though it's all being generated by your sleeping brain. So the fact that I remember the exact temperature of those fingers, how they felt neither warm nor cold, but somehow neutral, like they belonged to someone who had been standing very still for a very long time, that doesn't mean anything. Dreams can include tactile sensations even when nothing is actually touching you. And I definitely wasn't touched. I never left the bed, never went to the door, never opened it to see what might have been on the other side. I'm absolutely certain about that. I stayed exactly where I was, under the covers, watching and waiting for morning to come. Which is why it's so strange that I know what the hallway looked like, not from memory of walking through it during the day, but from that night specifically. The way the overhead light cast everything in that sickly yellow glow, how the carpet had worn thin in a path from the elevator to the far end where the emergency exit was. The pattern of water stains on the ceiling tiles that looked almost like a map of somewhere I'd never been. But I must have noticed those details at some other time, during normal daylight hours when I was coming or going from the apartment. Memory is tricky that way. It can take information gathered at different times and weave it together into what feels like a single, coherent experience. That's probably what happened. It would also explain why I remember the smell, that metallic scent, sharp and clean like copper pennies or fresh blood. Old buildings often have strange odors, especially in the ventilation systems. Could have been rust in the pipes or some kind of industrial cleaning product the maintenance staff used. Nothing unusual about that. The fact that the smell seemed stronger near the door, like it was seeping in from the hallway, that's just how air circulation works in these places. Odors travel along the path of least resistance, which often means under doors and through small gaps. Basic physics, nothing more. I didn't open the door to investigate. There was no reason to investigate because there was nothing to investigate. Whatever I thought I was experiencing was just the product of an overactive imagination combined with too much caffeine and not enough sleep. A perfect storm of circumstances that made perfectly ordinary things seem extraordinary. But I do remember standing there in the doorway, looking out into that yellow-lit hallway, the way it stretched in both directions, longer than it should have been given the building's layout. How the elevator at one end seemed much farther away than usual, like the perspective had been stretched or distorted somehow. That's impossible, though. Hallways don't change length. Buildings have fixed dimensions that don't alter based on the observer's state of mind. What I probably remember is looking down the hall during the day when different lighting conditions might have created an optical illusion of depth or distance. The elevator was definitely in its normal location. Same brushed steel doors, same call buttons, same little digital display showing which floor the car was on. Everything exactly as it should be. I didn't notice that the display was dark, showing no numbers at all. And I certainly didn't notice the way the elevator doors seemed to be moving, shifting slightly like they were breathing, expanding and contracting in a rhythm that matched what I thought I'd heard through my own door. Because I wasn't actually standing in the hallway, I never left my room. I'm completely sure about that. The door stayed closed all night, locked from the inside, with the security chain engaged exactly as I'd left it. I checked in the morning, and everything was exactly as it should be. The morning was when everything returned to normal. Sunlight streaming through the windows, the sounds of traffic building outside, people moving around in other apartments. All the familiar rhythms of a building full of life, nothing like the artificial stillness of the night before. I made coffee and toast, checked my phone for messages, got ready for another ordinary day. Everything was perfectly routine. There was no reason to think about what hadn't happened during the night, no reason to dwell on experiences that were clearly just the product of an overtired mind. But I did find myself avoiding the door, not consciously, just naturally gravitating toward other parts of the apartment. When I needed to leave, I found myself hesitating with my hand on the deadbolt, listening for sounds from the hallway before turning the lock. That's just normal caution, though. Everyone checks before opening their door, especially in apartment buildings where you never know who might be wandering around. It's basic urban survival instinct, nothing more. The hallway was empty when I finally opened the door. Bright fluorescent lighting, clean carpet, everything exactly as it should be. No signs that anyone had been standing there during the night. No evidence of any unusual activity whatsoever. I didn't look down at the floor immediately in front of my door. There was no reason to look there because I wasn't expecting to see anything. And I certainly didn't see those faint marks on the carpet, like someone had been kneeling there for a long time, pressing their weight into the fibers until they left an impression. Carpet shows wear patterns all the time. High traffic areas get compressed, cleaning equipment leaves marks, furniture creates indentations. There are dozens of perfectly reasonable explanations for any irregularities in the carpet's surface. The fact that the marks seemed to match the outline of someone kneeling very close to my door, with additional impressions that might have been from hands pressed against the floor, that's just pareidolia. the human tendency to see meaningful patterns in random data, like seeing faces in clouds or hearing voices in static. I walked to the elevator without looking back. The hallway felt perfectly normal in the daylight, just another corridor in just another building. The elevator arrived promptly when I pressed the call button. The doors opened smoothly, and I descended to the lobby without incident. Everything was exactly as it should be. Normal morning, normal building, normal day ahead. No reason to think about the night before, no reason to analyze experiences that clearly hadn't actually occurred. But I did find myself taking the stairs when I came home that evening, just for the exercise, nothing more. The stairwell was well lit and familiar, a perfectly reasonable alternative to the elevator. Lots of people prefer stairs for health reasons. I didn't choose the stairs because I was concerned about being trapped in a small enclosed space with someone who might have been watching my door the night before. That would be paranoid thinking, the kind of irrational fear that develops when you let your imagination run wild. The apartment felt safe and secure when I returned. I checked the locks, engaged the security chain, and settled in for another quiet evening. Everything was perfectly normal, exactly as it should be. Though I did find myself avoiding the bedroom for a while, staying in the living room until much later than usual. Just felt like a change of pace, nothing more. Sometimes it's nice to break routine, sleep somewhere different. I didn't want to avoid looking at the door. There was nothing to avoid because nothing had happened. The door was just a door, the hallway was just a hallway, and the previous night had been just another night. But as I'm getting ready for bed now, I can't help but notice how quiet it's gotten. That same dense, expectant silence that seems to be waiting for something. The shadows are starting to stretch and shift along the walls again, and there's that narrow strip of light beneath the door. It's probably nothing, though, just another ordinary night in an ordinary building. There's no reason to think anything unusual will happen. No reason at all to think that gentle scraping sound is about to start again. Story 10. Morning sunlight slipped through the half-drawn curtains, painting soft patterns on the living room floor. The air held a faint aroma of freshly polished wood, but what caught my eye was the ceiling fan, its blades eerily motionless despite the switch being set to high. A soft, rhythmic tapping echoed from the attic above, each beat casting an uneasy echo through the otherwise quiet house. Nothing happened that night. I need to make that clear from the start. Whatever you might think you're about to hear, it wasn't real. I was tired, probably dehydrated, maybe coming down with something. The mind plays tricks when you're not feeling well, doesn't it? Creates patterns where there aren't any, fills in blanks that don't need filling. I didn't go outside. I stayed right here in my room, door locked, curtains drawn. I remember that much perfectly clearly. The television was on, some late-night program about home renovation, and I fell asleep to the sound of power tools and cheerful voices discussing crown molding. That's all. A perfectly normal evening that ended with perfectly normal sleep. But I keep thinking about that sound the gravel made when I walked across it, which is strange because, like I said, I never left the house. The driveway has that loose gravel that shifts under your feet, makes this particular crunching noise that's different from regular footsteps, each stone grinding against the others, creating this almost musical rhythm. 37 steps from the front door to the street, though I've never actually counted them. The street lamp was out, had been for weeks according to the neighbors. City keeps saying they'll fix it, but never do. So it was dark, completely dark, which made it impossible to see anything anyway. Not that there was anything to see. Just an empty street, empty sidewalks, empty yards with their neat little fences and mailboxes standing at attention like tiny soldiers. I must have been dreaming about the cold. That would explain why I remember the way it felt against my skin, sharp and immediate, like stepping into a freezer. The kind of cold that makes you catch your breath and wonder if winter came early. But it's been warm lately, unseasonably warm, so that proves it was just my imagination creating sensations that weren't there. The thing is, I have this very clear memory of looking up at the sky and seeing no stars. Not because of clouds, but because the darkness seemed too thick, too present, like someone had hung a black sheet over everything. But that's impossible, of course. Stars don't just disappear. There's always some light pollution, some glow from the city, some reflection off the clouds, always something. I wasn't wearing shoes, which should have bothered me more than it did. The pavement was rough, little pieces of grit and debris that should have hurt, but somehow didn't. Like my feet weren't quite touching the ground, or like the ground wasn't quite solid. It's funny how dreams work, how they can make you feel like you're walking on air while simultaneously feeling every texture beneath you. There was a humming sound, very low, almost below the range of hearing. The kind of sound you feel in your chest rather than hear with your ears. Probably just the electrical transformer down the block, or maybe someone's air conditioning unit working overtime. Mechanical sounds carry differently at night, seem more ominous when everything else is quiet. I didn't follow the sound, that would have been foolish, and I'm not a foolish person. I stayed right where I was, which was in my room, in my bed, having a very realistic dream about standing in the middle of an empty street, listening to something that sounded almost like music, but wasn't quite. The kind of almost music that makes you want to move closer, even though every instinct tells you to run. The house 3 doors down had its garage door open, which was odd because the family who lives there is very security conscious. Always locking everything, checking twice, setting their alarm system with military precision. But there it was, gaping open like a mouth, and I could see the concrete floor gleaming dully in the non-existent light. I didn't go closer, absolutely not. That would have been trespassing, and besides, I was safely in my own room the entire time. But somehow I knew the garage was empty, completely empty, no cars or tools or storage boxes. Just bare walls and that smooth concrete floor that looked almost wet, though it hadn't rained in days. The humming got louder as I didn't approach the garage. It seemed to be coming from somewhere inside, or maybe from underneath, vibrating up through the foundation and into the air. A steady, rhythmic pulse that matched something I couldn't quite identify. Not my heartbeat, that was too fast, too irregular. Something else, something more fundamental. There was a smell too, metallic, like copper pennies or the taste you get in your mouth before a thunderstorm, but sharper, more clinical. The kind of smell you might find in a laboratory or a hospital, all antiseptic and cold and purposeful. Though of course I was dreaming all of this, so the smell was probably just my subconscious mixing memories of doctor visits and science classes. I found myself standing at the edge of the garage, looking into that empty space that somehow felt enormous despite being the size of a 2-car garage. The walls were painted white, or had been once, but now they had this grayish tint that could have been age or shadow or something else entirely. The back wall had a door, painted the same dingy white, with a small window set at eye level. The window was dark, but not empty dark, occupied dark, like someone was standing just behind it looking out, waiting. But that's ridiculous because the house was obviously empty, had been empty for months according to the neighbors. The family moved away suddenly, left most of their furniture behind, never came back for it. These things happen. I didn't try the door handle. That would have been breaking and entering, and like I said, I'm not that kind of person. but I somehow knew it would have turned easily without resistance, as if it had been oiled recently or was expecting to be opened. The metal would have been warm to the touch, warmer than the cool night air, as if someone had been gripping it from the other side. The humming stopped. The silence that followed was different from regular quiet. It had weight to it, presence, like something holding its breath. Even the usual night sounds, the distant traffic and settling houses and rustling leaves, seemed to pause, as if everything was listening, waiting for something to happen next. That's when I noticed the light coming from under the door. Not electric light, too soft and blue for that, more like moonlight, but there was no moon that night. I'm sure of that because I remember looking up and seeing only that black sheet sky. So it couldn't have been moonlight, but it looked exactly like moonlight, pale and cold and somehow alive. I didn't open the door, I want to be very clear about that. I turned around and walked back to my house, back to my room, back to my bed where I'd been the entire time. 37 steps across the gravel, up the front walk, through the door I definitely hadn't left unlocked, up the stairs to my room where the television was still playing that home renovation show. But I can still see what was behind that door. The small room painted that same dingy white with a single chair in the center. A simple wooden chair, the kind you might find in a kitchen or a waiting room. Nothing special about it except for the way it was positioned. Perfectly centered, facing the door as if someone had been sitting there recently and might return at any moment. The floor around the chair was different from the garage concrete, smoother, darker, with a surface that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. And there were marks on it, scuff marks maybe, or stains, arranged in a pattern that almost made sense, but not quite. Like a message written in a language you don't recognize but feel like you should. I didn't see any of this, of course. How could I? I was in my room the entire time, having a perfectly normal night's sleep interrupted by perfectly normal dreams that just happened to be unusually vivid and detailed. The kind of dreams that stick with you for days afterward, replaying in your mind with the persistence of actual memories. The chair had scratches on its arms, deep gouges in the wood that looked fresh, and there was something on the seat, a dark stain that could have been water or oil or something else entirely. Something that had soaked into the wood and left a permanent mark, a reminder of whatever had happened there. But nothing had happened there. Nothing happens anywhere really when you think about it. Things just exist and we assign meaning to them because we need patterns, need explanations, need reasons for the unreasonable. A chair is just a chair, a stain is just a stain, a humming sound is just mechanical equipment doing what mechanical equipment does. I woke up in my own bed in my own room, with sunlight coming through the windows and birds singing outside. Everything exactly as it should be, exactly as it always is. The television was still on, showing morning news instead of home renovation, but that makes sense. Programming changes overnight, follows a schedule designed to match people's daily rhythms. The only odd thing was my feet. They were dirty, covered with a thin layer of grit and dust that looked like it might have come from walking on concrete or pavement. But I must have walked around the house barefoot before bed, maybe went to the kitchen for water or checked the locks on the doors. Perfectly reasonable explanation for perfectly ordinary dirt. I showered, got dressed, went about my day as if nothing had happened, because nothing had happened. I made coffee, read the news, answered emails, did all the small tasks that make up a normal life. The kind of life where strange dreams are just dreams and empty garages stay empty and chairs sit in rooms where no one ever goes. But I keep thinking about that humming sound, how it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. How it felt familiar, like something I'd heard before but couldn't place. Like a song from childhood or the sound of a machine you grew up with, comforting and ominous at the same time. And I keep wondering about the family that moved away so suddenly, whether they left because they wanted to or because they had to, whether they ever went into that back room, ever sat in that chair, ever heard the humming that definitely wasn't there, whether they had dreams like mine, dreams that felt too real and too detailed and too persistent to be just dreams. The garage door is closed now. I can see it from my window, shut tight like it always is, like it always was. The neighbors say it's been closed since the family left, that no one has access to the house anymore, that it's just sitting there waiting for new owners who may never come. But I know what's behind that door, in that small room with the white walls and dark floor. I know about the chair and the stains and the blue light that isn't moonlight but looks exactly like moonlight. I know about the silence that has weight and the humming that comes from nowhere and the way metal door handles feel warm when they shouldn't. I know these things even though I was never there, even though none of it happened, even though it was all just a dream brought on by exhaustion and stress and the perfectly normal anxieties of modern life. Dreams aren't real, memories can be false, and sometimes the mind creates experiences that feel authentic but aren't. Tonight I'll go to bed early, make sure I'm well rested, maybe take something to help me sleep more soundly. No more late night television, no more staying up past reasonable hours, no more allowing my imagination to run wild with impossible scenarios and non-existent events. Everything is normal, everything is fine, everything is exactly as it should be. The humming started again about an hour ago.